They're wooden. They're glossy. I'll give it to my children. The capabilities of her. She just honestly lost her mind. Oh yeah. This is as good as it's. Hello, my dear. Oh my god, thank you. Oh, it's so cute.
Nice texture
This is my next tattoo, I think. It's so cute. I'm gonna have a lot explaining to do. Iron on me? Yeah, right on my body. Yeah, in your belly. This is what you know at the end of this conference. That was I'm gonna do this one and then I'm gonna like
No, of course not.
oh man, sorry, my brain's just skipping around.
Right, no worries.
I'm just fixing this file I just sent you, all the cities. It's a little bit of this. I'm sending you the city summary file, Chris, but there are some like discrepancies after this. It's very close. This is the count of which cities have participated. It's like a giant. Yeah. But you can see there's like some little things there, but it should be like very close. Yeah, but I mean, like, yeah. Where?
It's like the animated show, so there's a GA. I know I'm floating today, is there anything that needs to be planned yet for a job?
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is the easiest part. I thought we just show with the case.
Oh, I can talk to Crystal, she's like,
People do that. Trees for.
what's wrong?
Oh, we got it the same.
Oh, okay.
What needs to be done, like, maybe lighting on the house,
Yeah.
and maybe one more.
What kind of-
Who's out there?
Yeah, which is a joke.
Jim,
It's like,
Kathy,
I think it's
Sebastian.
complicated.
I'm gonna run that.
But you understand.
Yeah, everything's goes on.
So she heard
Oh, for different, oh, no,
yeah.
just checking. Two.
I'll help with the. I love the amps. Antimicrobial resistant.
Hello, everyone. We'll start in about 2 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Testing.
Technical innovation.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last day of the MetaSUB conference. We have an exciting set of talks for the morning session. We'll close out the session this morning with Dr. Mason's talk at the end. This morning, though, we have Rodolfo. Rodolfo is a doctoral student at the Osca Center of Biotechnology at Jagiellonian University. His research focuses on manipulation, analysis, and interpretation of omics data. As a bioinformatics scientist, he has expertise in metagenomics and environmental data sets. We'll be speaking to us this morning.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. It's such a pleasure to be here today, speaking on the bring of the top best in the world in the field, so I feel very privileged. My presentation is about antimicrobial resistance, especially in Polish soil, and so antimicrobial resistance is a phenomenon that occurs when bacteria and other living entities acquire or develop a resistance to drugs that were designed to kill them. On the left-hand side of the screen, on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a petri dish with culture bacteria. Those white circles are porous pieces of paper that were embedded in antibiotic drugs at different concentrations. The circles that build around those white pieces of paper shows that the bacteria is not able to grow around that drug, showing that the bacteria is not resistant, the bacteria is dying. So, but for some cases, as you can see, that the bacteria is fully able to almost fully ignore the drug, showing some resistance. This is known as antibiotic sensitivity test. Now, AMR is a big issue. There is this study from The Lancet that estimates that just in 2019, over 1 million people died directly because of AMR. And about 5 million people died undirected because of AMR-related illnesses. A report from the UN Environmental Program estimates that by 2050, nearly 10 million people will die per year, so the deaths will be comparable to cancer, which means it's a very big deal. This AMR is encoded in genes. There are different types of resistance, different types of compounds that the gene can grant the bacteria resistance to, different types of metals as well. And those genes are passed on from bacteria to bacteria either vertically through binary fission or horizontally with or without intermediates such as plasmid, viruses, and other mobile genetic elements. The same report from UN describes how antimicrobial resistance accumulates in the environment through deliberate and incorrect use of antimicrobial drugs, both in food, health industry, and in the hospital setting. The reason for this is that our current wastewater treatment plants, they are not only unable to filter out those genes, but they actually are working as a repository. So the water that goes through those places is actually gathering more antimicrobial resistance and then is afterwards being dumped on rivers and other water currents. There's a lot of research on this, and we seem to be unable to handle the problem for now. There's also a lot of research focused on food industry. There is this very interesting paper from MetaSUB in Denmark, where with it they were able to cut down antibiotic use by 60% only in Denmark, becoming a very good example, both in Europe and in the world, of antibiotic use cut down. Another paper from MetaSUB shows that antimicrobial resistance investigation on sewage in different countries is diverse. So in this figure we have two levels of information. Up here you have antimicrobial resistance abundance, which seems to be very heterogeneously distributed, especially if you consider third world countries and first world countries. So for example, Brazil, countries in Africa, Middle East, you have a higher abundance of antimicrobial resistance, indicated by this purplish color. And you have North America and European countries, Australia, the abundance of antimicrobial resistance genes seems to be lower. This other layer of information here shows that the different types of antimicrobial resistance that you can find in those countries is also heterogeneously distributed. So can we stop this thing? Well, probably not. But we can, just like COVID, prepare ourselves for it and maybe try to flatten or curb it. So we do believe that in order to do that, we have to be able to have a common communication between academia, industry, and government. And we can do that by allowing everyone to have a common understanding of the issue. A simple, practical understanding. So there are many initiatives that try to do that. MetaSUB is one of them. But I'm going to mention here the JPI-AMR, the Joint Programming Initiative on Antimicrobial Resistance, that sees this gap between academia, industry, and the government very clearly and tries to bridge this gap by putting those people in the same room periodically. Because they work within the One Health framework, which acknowledges that the human health and the animal health, environmental health is but one closed system, and those three segments cannot be independently investigated or improved. We are one thing after all. So what about soil resistance, specifically Polish resistance? In this presentation, I'm going to try to answer a few of those questions, how to characterize it, both qualitatively and quantitatively. Can we identify some core resistance? What is the influence of soil properties on soil resistance? How to quickly compare two types of samples in terms of resistance. But before I get to the methods and to the results, I want to convince you that Poland is actually a very suitable model for countrywide soil microbiome studies, not only for resistance, but microbiome studies in general. The reason for that is that Poland is pretty moderate in size. So in Europe, it's a big country. On a global scale, it's not that big, it's bigger than many countries, but it has a significant size that has a very uniform microclimate. So the temperatures that you see north, south, west, east are very similar in terms of Celsius degrees, with the exception of some anomalies which can be, for the sake of those studies, disregarded. It's pretty flat all over the country, with the exception of the mountains in the southernmost region, which account for less than 2% of the territory, and it has very uniform agricultural practices. It is regulated, it has regulated antibiotic use. Now, one might add here that although it's regulated, it's not enforced, and people don't seem to follow this. There are evidences for that. And it's pretty environmental and politically stable, granted by the European Union and ruled by the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. So just for the sake of comparison, we have the state of Poland compared to the United States. It's a little bigger than the state of Arizona and slightly smaller than the state of New Mexico. But let's talk about the data now. Pavel talked about this briefly on his talk on Tuesday. It's about the SMART project. It's a soil microbiome analysis forensic tool. This was an initiative from the Central Forensic Laboratory of the Police in Poland. They teamed up with top universities in the country and also with a biotech company, Ardian. And the goal here was to identify key genetic signatures that were specific to different regions in Poland. They would like to use that for future detective police work. And in order to achieve that, they performed a massive countrywide sequencing endeavor. So they put together 960 metagenomic samples. Those are divided in 4 different seasons, 80 meta locations that can be seen as, they can be grouped in 12 different cities, 3 samples per location. So this is pretty impressive on its own. But to top that, for each of the meta locations, they perform the soil profiling, concentrations of different metals, different compounds, zinc, copper, magnesium, calcium, and more. And they also have gathered physiochemical properties such as pH, water holding capacity, soil organic matter. All of this was put together along with metadata, 3D coordinates, soil type, weather, temperature, and more. Now, this links with what Chris said in his first talk 2 days ago, that metadata is a love letter to the future, and I really like that. I'm stealing that. So let's talk about the methodology. Focus on this for now. We have all those samples. We sequenced them using NovaSeq 6,150 base pairs and quality controlled them. What we see here is that the distribution of reads per sample is quite heterogeneous, but we have at least 66 million per sample, 66 million reads per sample, which grants us a very nice big scale of comparison studies that can be done. We believe that this investigation might uncover unique microbial signatures specific to Polish territory. We have over 128 million reads, so we are working with big data here. We have then, after quality controlling, investigated those reads using AMR++ version 3, which detects antimicrobial resistance genes, and We have normalized those counts by dividing the number of gene hits by the number of sequence base pairs, so that we could make comparisons across different samples of different sizes. The first thing that we see here is that we have detected over nearly 2,000 different AMRs. This includes different homologous genes, and most of them are associated with the type of drug resistance, followed by biocides, metals, and multi-compound resistance. The CD that has the highest concentration, the highest number of AMRs is toluene, which I'll put in context later. But all of those genes, they may or may not be present in all the samples. There are different abundances. So we want to be able to aggregate those values into one single score so that we can quickly compare them across the data set and identify what is the most resistant sample. Can we simplify this? Now, for isolated organisms, this was already solved by Kromperman in 1983, about 40 years ago. And he proposed that in order to calculate multiple antibiotic resistance for isolates, one would simply test that isolate against a set of antibiotic drugs and divide the number of antibiotic drugs that this isolate is resistant against by the total number of antibiotics tested. This works pretty well, specifically for a small set of isolates with the same number of tested drugs. You can quickly get a ratio and compare them and rank them. Now, this has limitations because it's isolate specific, and the whole reason of doing WGS sequencing is that we cannot isolate everything. Maybe James is going to prove us wrong in the near future, but for now we are unable to. It also does not factor in different levels of resistance, which we know that exist, and it does not consider associated weight to different types of antibiotics. This has been updated in the last 40 years, and different levels of resistance were taken into account, and also different antibiotics, which are more relevant than others and that should be avoided. However, it's still isolate specific, so we are trying to change that. So we propose here an extension of Kromperman's approach, an approach that can be used for microbial communities as well. The difference here is that we group those AMRs into homologous genes and group them again based on the classes of antibiotic resistance. Those classes being, for example, beta-lactams, aminoglycosides, rifampicin, macrolides, and so on. We then divide the total count of numbers by the total number of classes, and we can quickly get a similar score that what Kromperman was proposing. This is the distribution of antimicrobial resistance index previously presented for different cities for each of the meta locations. On the y-axis, you see the resistance index, and on the x-axis, you see the different meta locations grouped by city. The first thing that we notice here is that for some cities, for all the meta locations, you have a very uniform distribution of resistance, indicating that those places, regardless of where you collect it, they seem to be very similar in terms of antimicrobial resistance. The same cannot be said about all the samples if you consider the different levels of antimicrobial resistance and also the different standard deviation for each of those meta locations. When we plot that over the territory of Poland, we start to see some very interesting patterns. I have scaled those values from 0 to 1, from minimum to maximum value of resistance index. So you can see here in this very bright green down here, Solina city has a 0, indicating it has the lowest resistance within the Polish territory according to our metrics. And Warszawa, Warsaw, the capital, has the highest number of them. Now, one might think, okay, the capital, big number of people, it has the highest anthropogenic influence, that makes sense, right? Well, not quite, because although Warsaw is the capital, most of people are put together, clustered in this Silesian metropolis, the Silesian voivodeship, where you have the biggest amount of people, most densely populated. So maybe this is not about demography. We have then decided to add another layer of information, fluvial water, and then we start to see some very interesting patterns. So we could see already that the antimicrobial resistance seems to correlate with the latitude, because the higher you go, the closer you are to the Baltic Sea, the higher the resistance is. So just for the context, I'm sure you know that already, but we have the Baltic Sea here up north. So this is basically water. On the west side, you have Germany, more or less around here you have Czechia, the previously known Czech Republic. Down here you have Slovakia, below Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia somewhere there. Right. So you have Germany more or less here, Czechia, Slovakia, Ukraine, Belarus, Baltic Sea. So just to give a context, this is water. And the rivers that I'm going to talk about, the Vistula River, or Wisła in Polish, this is a river that cuts through the heart of this country. It's the longest and has the highest significance both in history, culturally, and also for military applications. It has about 1,000 kilometers, 650 miles, and was used since medieval times as a major trade route. Now, we decided to focus on the cities, for the sake of this presentation, on the cities that are along this river. We wanted to investigate what is the influence of the river on those cities by the river. So I've calculated the antimicrobial resistance index. From now on, I'm just going to say resistance index for all of those cities across time. And we can see from left to right, from nascent to the mouth of the river, beginning to end, that the resistance seems to be very dynamic. So what we are seeing here is that whatever index that we use, the snapshot that we are taking seems to register only but a moment of abundance, and this might change all the time. I was doing some rehearsing this presentation yesterday, and I saw that perhaps if I would sort the rows as well, I could identify some different patterns, because the different seasons that you see indicated by the different rows, they can be sequenced in a specific way, and you can see what I would say a lump of antimicrobial resistance traveling through time and space. But I didn't do that because I didn't want to complicate things, but this is something I'm going to investigate later on. I wanted to group all of those genes together, and I wanted to find out what is the most relevant antimicrobial resistance core resistome within the Polish cities along the river. So I put all those genes together in one plot and scattered them based on frequency and abundance. And I tried to find what is the most abundant and frequent genes that are present in this data set. So I was very strict. I fetched only the 10 topmost, 10% most abundant in terms of presence, and the 10 topmost frequent, that is present in about 90% of the samples, which are those guys right here. I had then checked their classes, and you can see that most of them are associated with drugs resistance, aminoglycosides, multi-drug type resistance, macrolides, rifampin, and so on, followed by multi-compound metals and biocides. I then plotted this along the river stream. So again, from left to right, the nascent source to the mouth of the Baltic Sea, and you can see that you have two distinct groups here. The first one, this is a very noisy plot, and this is on purpose because we can identify two subplots here. You can see this baseline of resistome that seems to not change much over space. We're not talking about time here. And we have those outliers that are much abundant than everything else, and they do seem to drastically change. I wanted to find a way to filter out this, so I gathered the 5% most variant genes across time and space, and this is what we got. So those 5 genes, they seem to increase across space using the river as a vehicle, and they end up from Katowice, increasing in Warszawa, in this case of the O23S, decreasing a little bit in Toruń and Gdynia. Now, from left to right, again, nascent source to the mouth of the Baltic Sea. And what we can see is, well, we have different concepts associated with those genomes, and we can look further into that, but I will not go into that direction for the sake of this presentation. So what we can see is that the resistome index that I'm proposing here may be very rudimentary, may be very simplistic for now, but it does offer some insights. And it has to be taken into account that it has to be taken with a grain of salt, because the presence of those DNA does not imply transcription or translation. This aggregation method, like I said, is pretty rudimentary, so it may produce some artifacts, and we're trying to refine this, okay? But now, moving from the resistome aggregation, I'm going to talk about some correlation analysis that we have done. And for this, we have put together the resistome profile that I just talked about, and the soil profiling that I'm going to explain a little bit more in a second, and satellite imagery. I then performed all versus all Pearson correlations, and we have observed some patterns. So the first thing that we can see is that for the different types of physiochemical profiling that were done for the different metal locations, is that the distribution seems to be quite normal, with the exception of some outliers. You have calcium that seems to be much higher for the city of Krakow, and copper, which seems to be much higher for the city of Kalisz Pomorski. Now, just to give a little context, we have used CLMS satellite imagery. So CLMS stands for Copernicus Land Monitoring Service. It's a service from Europe where you have satellite images that are taken periodically and they are post-processed so that we can classify into different types of land use. This is a very rich metadata that can aggregate a lot of value to our data set. And for this analysis, we have different types of land use. We have 44 different types of labels. And this data is actually used for environmental monitoring, policy making, research applications, which is what we're doing right now. And the very interesting thing is that you can fragment different layers of satellite imagery and treat them independently. So you have here different types of pastures, the distribution, coniferous forests, water courses, and this has a resolution of 100 meters, so it's pretty granular. The analysis here that we made is we made a radius area around each of the cities and gather the types of land use for each of the cities. So you can see some interesting patterns. So you see, for example, that for the city of Gdynia, which is at the mouth of the sea up here, the sea and ocean type of land use is the highest. That makes sense, right? It's the beach. And for example, for Kalisz Pomorski, down here on the lower right corner, you have the highest number of coniferous forests. We performed over-seasonal correlation, Pearson, and kept only those that were above 0.6 because we were interested only in moderate to strong correlations. There was nothing higher than that, at least not for now. And we saw that the highest number of correlations is on spring. Now, the way we interpreted it is that after winter, things are frozen, and once things start to melt, the bacteria that are most adapted to those different types of soils, they have a head start. They are able to be in advantage and grow faster, and therefore the genes that are present in those bacteria are in highest abundance. Once summer catches on, the importance of the different types of soil starts to drop, and the other bacteria start to catch on. So this is how we are interpreting this at this point. And the same happens for autumn and winter again. So it's a cycle. We have data from 1 year, so it would be very interesting to do this yearly, but then of course it's a lot of money. So the takeaway message of this presentation are Poland is arguably a very good model for countrywide soil resistance studies. And I would say it's also a convenient model because we happen to have those samples laying there somewhere. We do see that the Polish soil resistance is pretty complex, and aggregation methods, despite their simplicity, offer some very interesting insights that can yield some very quick assessment and offer some insights that can be used further. We also suspect that the Polish rivers act as a vector, as a vehicle for antimicrobial resistance transportation, warranting special attention. And we do believe that soil property correlates with resistance dynamically over time, and the temperature has a big influence in that. We want to move forward focusing on the shore of the river, not on the cities themselves. So I plotted the map again and used a little marker there to highlight that I'm going to be investigating what is the land type of use along the shore with a radius that is going to be defined yet. We do believe that agricultural practices have a strong influence on the antimicrobial resistance genes that we see along those cities by the river. And we want to conduct a coordinated analysis considering mags, viruses, and mobile genetic elements. We have been working on this for about 6 to 8 months now, so we were not able to put all of this together for this presentation. We just finalized the mega assembly, by the way, 1 week before arriving, so we're happy for that. We also want to refine our resistance strategy aggregation and consider drugs that are used in agriculture, food industry, and used by veterinarians. Most importantly, we want to stay grounded, and I don't mean that as a joke, although I added a smile in there. I mean this in a metaphorically and serious way because after working with this data for the past 6 months, I have noticed that doing data exploratory analysis or data-driven research on big data of such a dimension and such a multidimensionality, you may easily fall into the trap of accidentally wrapping your hypothesis around your observations rather than producing observations or producing results using experiments that were designed to test our hypothesis in the first place. So you might end up bending reality just to suit your narrative. And we do want to stay grounded and be honest with the data, with ourselves, with the scientific community, and pay respect to the privilege we have to work with this data and also the responsibility that comes with it. Yeah, so we want to stack different types of expertise, put together different biological entities, hydrogeology, weather, and we are making connections with the most diverse types of people because we do believe that interdisciplinarity is the focus here. We are not going to be able to answer those questions if we stick to biology. So yeah, actually I should have ended that before. We want to try to avoid the conspiracy theory unicorn. So there are even more questions that I would like to cover, but we're not going to go through them today. I'm sure that you have also other questions, and I hope that you can ask me so that either I answer or I take it back to the lab and try to answer myself again. With that, I want to announce that this work was financed by the Polish National Science Center under the Sonata Peace Grant. The funds for this trip were awarded by the Excellence Initiative Program, Visibility and Mobility Module, run by the Jagiellonian University. And I want to thank everyone for the attention. That was enough. I'm taking questions.
Thank you, Rodolfo, for a fantastic talk. Let's open up the audience.
How much do you think you're missing? How much do you think you're missing in terms of the resistome kind of being determined by what we see in commercial agriculture and clinical settings, but not so much going out looking for resistome that shows up more in an environment that hasn't made its way into those man-made settings?
Right. So I think that for those cases, we can try to find a distinguishing group that has lower anthropogenic influence. So for example, you have those cities that have a high index of coniferous forests, Kalisz-Pomorski, for example, you don't have much people there. So you can infer that anthropogenic influence is lower, and maybe this can be used as a baseline resistome that we can subtract from the rest and see to tell apart what is anthropogenic influence and what is baseline resistome. So I think that would be my initial approach, but of course I'm happy to hear more suggestions.
Okay, so maybe I'll just give maybe not a question but a comment. If you go back to slide where you have the correlation between the physical chemical, a bit further earlier. This one. So for these first two, okay, because Rodolfo is not from Poland, so he might not have like, the enough background knowledge. So the first one, the calcium, the blue one, is crackle, right? So the crackle is you have a lot of limestone around. That's why you have the calcium there. And in terms of the green one, so this is Głogów. So this is the center of the region in Poland where they dig for the copper ore, and you have the copper industry. So this is what is getting here in this region. And the second comment, I think Klaus might like to comment more about this. The screen jump in resistance might also come from the fact that this is the starting period of the fertilization, and in Poland you use sludge for fertilizing the fields.
All right, thanks, Rodolfo. Great talk. You didn't have to preempt my comments. So I wrote a report for the Helsinki Committee on just this, and it is sludge utilization for farming has the highest correlation to deposition of AMR, bugs in general. Now, I commend you for your attempt to try to establish some kind of index, because one of the key issues is that there is no good index. You sequence and then you say, oh, it's higher here and it's higher there. And I think that standardization is very important. There is a concept of the non-effective concentrations in environmental monitoring versus the minimum inhibitory concentration in pharmaceutical consideration of antibiotics. And the two are sort of not really interchangeable. And I think my key point to this is if you look at the abundance plots from that Nature paper, which I think sucks big time, you see that span between 2 × 10⁵ and 4 × 10⁵. So it's a twofold increase. It gives you these very big, you're looking at a heat map, and it looks like Africa and Asia, they're destroying it, the whole world. I think it's misleading, but I think it's really key that you keep your work up with regards to standardization. You might want to look at per, say, 16 as copy as a way, an alternative way to compare with the per sequence base pair. Thank you, great talk.
Thank you very much for the insight.
Hi. So a very good talk. So I have a quick question. So how good this resistance as a marker for forensic? So can you use some machine learning models using this resistance as a feature and show something like they are able to predict from which city or which place they are?
So yeah, we were thinking about doing some data science feature prediction or feature selection using the resistance index as the feature, either as a target or as an input for the model. But we are not confident yet that we can use this because it's a self-made index, and I don't want to introduce my own bias into the model and, like I said, wrap the outcome based on my first understanding. So I believe at some point it will be possible, but this would require my model to be further refined. For now, it's pretty simplistic. I will personally not be confident to use this in data science, feature selection, feature prediction applications.
You observe that so the resistance is accumulates down the flows of the river, and so the river flows also the same direction. So your kind of model is that maybe the river is a vector.
Yes.
And if you sample the river bed, that makes sense.
The what, sir?
The river bed.
The riverbed, yes.
The bottom of the river. Then it makes sense. But I just wonder, how do you think the resistance genes kind of travel from the flow river to the soil around the river on that kind of?
We suspect that pluviometry may have a role in that. So rain wash the bacteria down the river, and this is being used as a travel. So this is what we would be expecting.
Yeah, and it goes down, but your model says that it's distributed from the river to the, if the river is a vector, so it's from the river.
Well, we don't know if the river is spreading or if the regions around the river are dumping the resistance into the river, because we have the sampling at the river shore, and we don't know the directionality vector there. We know that it's going with the river, the resistance seems to increase with the river, but we don't know from the river to land what is the direction here. I suspect that from land to river, from land to water, based on the rain, but we don't know that. Okay.
Did they use the river for irrigation? Did they use the river for irrigation so they're pumping out of the river back onto the farmland?
Did they use what?
The river for irrigation.
Aha, yes, they do. So there you have it.
But the sludge, it's the sludge that's used to fertilize. It's the sludge from wastewater that's used to fertilize farmland on the border, on the banks of the river. So that's the vector that the Helsinki Committee thinks is driving.
We want to make use of different databases with different types of annotations so that we can break down what is the influence of resistome in terms of bioscience using agriculture, sewage, and also antibiotics from civilians and veterinarians. But for now, we are treating this all as one big group of genetics.
You're good.
Okay.
Okay,
Rodolfo,
thank you.
awesome talk. I'm really interested in the antibiotic resistance you're seeing.
I'm not sure where you are, sorry. Oh, Jesus, okay.
Sorry. I was curious if you saw correlations between if, this sample had a certain type of antimicrobial resistance, say like beta-lactamases, and you wouldn't see it also resistant to like quinolones or.
Yeah, so we performed all versus all correlation also within the resistome profile. We identified hundreds, thousands of correlations, but I didn't bring them here. Yeah, we see co-occurrence of those genes, but I thought that, so this was such a huge amount of data that the network would be so ugly and dense that I was not going to be able to show it here. But yeah, there's a lot of co-occurrence of genes of different drug classes.
Rodolfo, that's a good talk.
in the stack that you have of different experts, the biggest miss is the traditional microbiologist who can actually validate your theory. Please have them, okay?
Okay.
That's a suggestion. Second one is your RA index. You have to validate with no, because it's a strain specific. You take, for example, Klebsiella pneumonia. The Klebsiella pneumonia regularly, you can treat and it may not be that much virulent. So hypervirulent Klebsiella pneumonia versus non-virulent, then you will validate this RA index, that will be more powerful.
Okay.
Have you done that?
No, I have not. I will definitely do. Thank you for the insight.
Awesome talk, and per usual, stellar bioinformatics, so really thank you. Okay, how do you distinguish between anthropogenic and anthropogenic driven and naturally occurring antimicrobial resistance? Because most of it's just like, it's soil, it's there. So have you looked at the most commonly used antibiotics per region in Poland and line that up with the most common classes that you see?
That's the plan. We don't have the different antibiotics specific to each region. We do have the antibiotics recommended by the CDC. And we see that they're there, but I have not addressed them. Which of those are more abundant region-wise? So this information exists. It's going to be done. We are trying to contact the people from the medical college to see what is the most used antibiotic drug region-wise. But this requires coordination with people and real contact. So we're working on it. This is really preliminary data, and we see a lot of potential. So
Let's thank Rodolfo. We'll move on to the next one. All right, next we'll have Haran. Dr. Haran Alhadi is a professor at Lund University in Sweden. His research uses computational approaches to address complex disorders, population genetics, and paleogenomics.
Thank you so much. Ohio gozaimasu. Today I'd like to talk about how we can use the MetaSUB data for the field of microbial forensics. Microbial forensics is a funny word because there is no such field. And the first question that we want to ask is why? The beginning was promising. Bacteria was first discovered in 1676. DNA was only known 80 years later. We had a good century to explore microbiome potential. And indeed, in the 19th century, it was first became apparent that we can use it to understand the reason for people's death. So there was a lot of excitement, a lot of great scientists, Pasteur, Koch, Lister, all of them took advantage, developed new ways to understand microbiome, how to sterilize a patient before surgery, how to sterilize tools, and so forth. Agatha Christie included this microbiome in one of her murder mystery. There was a Thessalian infection, and microbiome were involved. So there is a lot of promise, a lot of understanding that bacteria are involved in death, and there can be a way of capitalizing on this to solve murders. However, as of now, we're not using any of those tools that microbiome offers us. There is no such use of evidence such as post-mortem intervals, grave location, or links to objects or locations as of now, even though the potential exists. And the question is why? You've heard a little bit about Pavel's talk, and then the previous speaker about forensics experts. They don't like innovation. They're very, very conservative, and it is part of their profession. They have to present an evidence to the court. It's sustainable, reproducible, statistically backed up. Legal court system is also very slow to adopt. May I remind you that CODIS was not used until 1998, although it was envisioned in 1990. So that's how slow things are. Just to reflect on that, let me show you a small clip of one of my favorite called Continuum.
Fine, just know that I calculated that this race is going to take at least 7 more hours to get going. Just saying. Okay.
Take some folders. Inside by side.
Yes. So she's from the future, she's chicken her hair.
Yeah.
So she can go fast. Here's a typical cup.
Oh, wait, I have not.
Hey, we got a match. He's future him developed the chip she's using. So you can look at the confused look on his cup's face and like, do you understand any of this crap? I mean, that's your typical approach. And she says she has a knack for pattern recognition, which is completely suitable to my next part of the talk, which is how can we use pattern recognition to link microbiome with objects. Before that, let me just remind you that the courts are not the problem. The Supreme Court in the US, in this case of Dahlberg versus Merrill, stated that they introduced new type of evidence that the court has not learned that before. It needs to be scientifically based. It needs to be published. It needs to be acknowledged. There needs to be a calculated statistical error. It needs to be falsifiable. Okay, we all know those terms. This is exactly the kind of science that we do. And the court acknowledged that. So the court is not the problem either. What about privacy? Is privacy the problem? Well, once again, no. With court order, you can get microbiome evidence just like you can get DNA evidence. And Chris and I and several other authors wrote this paper that did very well about concern about genetic privacy in the area of microbiome forensics. So there we express concerns which are valid, but none of this is a reason not to use it. Okay? So what it is that we did, we aimed to develop the first microbiome tool to link microbiome to physical evidence. A physical evidence can be a place, it can be an object. And the goal is to, if you imagine in any movie that you see people use knives or guns or something and then wipe it in their shirt like this, right, to supposedly wipe out all the human DNA, but they're smearing all their microbiome on it, okay? So this is the kind of thing that we want to identify, linking the microbiome to objects or to places. In this case, it's to places. So we developed the microbiome geographic population structure, or MGPS, the first microbiome stress analysis. We just got support from the European Horizons for PhD students, which will be part of a doctoral network. So other students in this network will develop other approaches for forensics. So it's pretty cool consortium. What is MGPS? MGPS is a supervised machine learning tool that employs GITs, geographically informative taxa. This is the term that we coined. And the idea is to use abundance data of different bacteria which have non-uniform distribution in the world. So all the 4 taxa that you see here, you can see they're only abundant in some places, but not in others. So if we have enough of those, then we can potentially build unique profiles for every place. And then we can train a machine learning to identify and recognize those patterns and to link the swab, the bacterial swab to place. So this is how this thing works. By the way, we have quite a few pathogens, just out of interest of what it is that is driving the signal. This is quite an interesting question. The first step of this tool is feature selection. We have to find those bacteria that are linked to geography that exhibit this non-uniform distribution. So just to illustrate, what does it look like? On the top, you can see all data. So these are all the taxa, some 6,000 of them, and they're color-coded by sampling site. So you can see there is no difference. And here you can see the 200 hits that we found, and you can see some very nice geographical patterns. B and C are 2 controls. These are all the not hits, all the 5800. So you can see there's no geographical patterns, and these are just 200 random ones. So you can see the geographical pattern is lost. So hopefully you can see that there is something there. If there's something there, it becomes a pattern recognition problem that we can use. The next thing is feature engineering. Here we're using Baruta to identify even more features and improve the accuracy. On top, you can see this was our original results before feature engineering, and after feature engineering, we increased the average accuracy of the tool to almost 60%. So over 60% of the samples can be predicted less than 100 kilometers of the sampling sites. Okay. So this is quite a nice result. The next step, we want to correct for imbalanced sampling sites. As you can see, the top is MetaSUB sampling location. The bottom is the soil microbiome that we see another data set, and you can see the problem we're having. I mean, it's not uniformly covered, right? So what we're doing here, we're sampling around the points. So we're sampling around here and here computationally, just to increase the number of the samples. And that helps, but it does not completely solve the problem because there is still a big difference between this side and this side, which is why we're going the next step, which is imputing. So now we're, based on our understanding of the RSA, the relative frequency balance, and the geography, we're making up those trends. We're filling up the gaps, just so the algorithm can be more accurate. And then we construct the algorithm. So essentially, we're now training it on those patterns against the geographical coordinates, and we're teaching it to recognize those patterns. And then the final step is, of course, the site prediction. The algorithm is being provided with the abundance data of the area, and it outputs the continents, the city, and the geographical locations. Okay. So this is the idea. On top, you can see this is again what we're trying to do. If somebody takes my shoes that came from Sweden, and I do this, would you be able to swap this area and say yes, this came from Sweden? This is all we're trying to do here, and this is you collect the sample, you calculate the abundance frequency, you're doing the random forest training, and then you create your prediction. This is what the algorithm does. So how accurate it is? Well, very accurate. We reach 92% accuracy of samples that's predicted to the sampling site. Over 60% of them are less than 100 kilometers. But, and you can see the our rock plots, they look extremely healthy. But what does it mean? You can see some of the triangles are the sampling site and the pluses are the predictions. But you can see some of the yellow ones from Europe in America. So we have samples in America that we're predicting to America that came from Europe. Is this right or wrong? We have no idea, right? This can be tourists. Essentially, it's essentially what we want to find. We don't want to find have a perfect match here. We want to find the truth. We want to know that this is Sweden, not say, no, you're wrong, you're in Japan, this is not possible, right? So we developed a statistical method to show that when we say this is Sweden, it's still correct. I won't get into it now because I didn't get much time. But the method said that a lot of those supposedly false positives are actually correct. Looking into finer data sets, Hong Kong, we can predict 82% of the samples to the station. Half of them within 1 kilometer of the station. We're getting close, right? I mean, if there was some kind of murder on the express, and I don't know how many you are big of Agatha Christie, we can say, oh yeah, 1 kilometer, this is where the murder got the train. This is nice, right? In New York, where you have constant flow of people anywhere, we got over half of the people to the correct sampling group. This is nice. In conclusions, MGBS employee GITS, a unique concept that we developed to improve geographical predictions. It's employing the sequence abundance data to identify the source site of the site. The tool is completely independent of the sampling method. It works on 16 RSA. It works on, we applied it to the microbiome data, to the soil microbiome data, to the marine microbiome data. It doesn't really care what the data. It can also work on bubbles data. It doesn't really care. As long as you give it the abundance data and the geographical locations, it will train to recognize it. Okay? Yeah, and we hope it will become a useful tool for forensics microbiology. The next step for us is to sweep Malmö, which is the city, it's like the Gotham city of Sweden. Lots of crime there, and there's a lot of interest in the tool. We talk to the local police enforcement, and we get from them a sense into what it is that they're looking for. And yeah, we hope to do some good service to the public. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take questions.
This time, let's open it to the audience for questions.
Okay, I'm gonna stop. Yeah, really interesting talk, and it really caught my attention because recently I've had a talk with a bunch of people that work, lawyers that work with criminal cases, and they were explaining to me how out of date the tools that they use are, and I feel like the law enforcement, they don't really understand error rates or uncertainties in tools like this, or even in sequencing methods. And for example, as an example of a real case, like it seemed that in this case there was a corrupt police that had implanted a gun into a bag of belongings from a person. And, you know, they send it back with the gun. Would you sequence it? Would you say, is that from the person or was it implanted by the police? Because you can find a lot of people's DNA there. So how do you assure as a scientist to a police or a court that this is real, this is true, and that they're not gonna convict someone to 10 years of prison or more just because we have uncertainty or error rates and we're not really sure 100%, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an excellent question. The general guidelines in the law enforcement system is that we rather have 10 criminals walking free than have one innocent person locked by mistake. So this is how accurate this needs to be. And may I remind you again exactly what Maria said. It is very difficult to convey the public and the jury in the U.S. what error rate stands for. If I say I did a CODIS test in New York court and I have 1 to million chances of being wrong. It's a big chance, right? But New York has 10 million people. Is this a lot or is it not? It's very difficult to explain this to people because they don't conceptualize such high numbers. Otherwise, nobody would fill the lottery, right? And this is why CODIS has to be upgraded to decrease that error rate even more. Now, how do we answer this question? By doing sampling and making sure that when we make predictions into Sweden, it is going only to Sweden and not to Denmark. And if it's going to Denmark, then we have to say, hey, look, 5% of my samples are going to go to Denmark. This is my error rate, assuming these are not people from Denmark who come to Sweden, because that happens. So yeah, this is the kind of things that I do not want to show. This is major part of the work is to calculate the accuracy. I showed it a little bit with those rock curves, right? Is to calculate the accuracy and use any possible way of getting more errors from the data at hand, collecting more data, and just present all our statistics honestly. There's no other way of doing it. Yes?
I think I have my. And just also to comment to what you said, I mean, when we were doing our study in Poland, and we were working a lot with the Central Forensic Laboratory of the Police, so they say that because of the things which everyone has rose, they did not go with these results yet to the court, but during the investigation process, it will help them to make one or the other hypothesis more or less probable. So to prioritize what to do first, because at the beginning of the investigation, the time is the most important. So if they can, pick one and then focus on it, thanks to this microbiological evidence, it's already helping them. Yeah. And my question is to this slide is that when you were calculating it, it was for when you were living one sample or the whole city.
Sorry,
I mean, the question is whether you were just doing classification and prediction.
This is all predictions.
So then in the reference, I mean the testing, in the learning set, there was no any other sample from the city.
Correct. So we trained on the 1 year of the MetaSUB and predicted the other year where some cities were not in them. So yes, we can make predictions all over the world, which is, You can see by the location of those crosses that they're not on the city, which would be classification. Right? Yes.
Hi, so interesting talk. So, can you predict, given a microbiome, can you predict what sort of crime is that, or is that possible? Or let's say, whether any specific microbial signatures or specific microbial communities, given a crime scene, would you be able to do that?
Not specific. Remember, all of this is based on 200 gits that we've identified. We have 200 gits for the MetaSUB, 200 gits for the soil, and 200 gits for the aqua. It just came out like that. I don't know why it's some kind of magic number. But all of these taxa are very geographic specific. We can use 250, it's just not going to improve it as much. So we made those graphs that we can show how accuracy peaks and then goes down. So I don't know about specific bacteria.
Okay, but even in the case of the Manhattan one, where you were very specific to Manhattan, right? So even there, you cannot predict specific microbial signatures or specific microbial communities for a specific crime scene. Would you be able to do that?
All our urban microbiome is using the same 200 gits. We're not recalibrating it for the major cities. In fact, and those gits are different. That's what I'm saying. The soil ones do not appear in the urban environment, so they're all behaving differently.
Thanks.
Which brings as an interesting question how they're going to behave in the monumental. And the monumental is another environment, which is half soil, half urban kind of thing. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, so to add what Maria was asking about talking to lawyers and other things, right now what is in practice is human genome-based analysis. They can even predict the ethnicity of the person who is actually in the crime with the human genome rather than microbiome. It is in practice.
I actually have a question. So I was wondering, like here, I feel like you're more going to be understanding the movement of people rather than even like track forensics, right? I'm a huge hiker, even on a hiker standpoint, your boots, they carry microbiomes everywhere you go. So maybe, like the scruff thing at the beginning of a trail, testing that to see where people have been, to then go see what's going on. But that's not everywhere, that's not an urban microbiome. So maybe trying to find some type of common ground and implement how people move around can help you maybe more so pinpoint where people have been to then understand the forensic standpoint as well.
The polite request from law experts in Sweden was to do exactly that, work on the shoelaces, because you cannot track that we're all using shoes and we need to move. Rather than do it the way the MetaSUB does it by swabbing surfaces. We'll try both. Yeah.
Really interesting.
Thanks, great talk. Now, given the temporal variations in microbiome composition, you don't have any seasonal data.
Correct.
In the sampling we did in Stockholm, it was very clear that seasonal variation both in air and surface samples. So what do you think that could actually help with, say, fine-tuning your models?
It's a limitation, definitely. We can only note that in the paper. We're optimistic, given that we were able to train the model on 1 year of MetaSUB and then make prediction on the second year. But that's, once again, there is no seasonal effect. If there is, we will retrain the model and we will have one model for summer, one model for winter. But that's all we can do.
Great. Let's talk about that.
The soil
are pretty strange. So we can get the data for the seasonal stuff. Yeah.
The soil data does not have seasonality. It was sampled all year long, and then we're doing okay. So I'm not super worried about it, but of course.
Well, the outside subway stations we have data for, and there you get a bit of a signal of the environmental. It's still urban.
Yeah.
Albeit not.
I'd love to have more data, as usual.
Just out of curiosity, I saw that the current location for prediction is around 100 kilometers, but for crime scene, it's going to be like, I guess, 100 kilometers is really far. So how much do you think would be needed to like pinpoint to like a lesser distance?
Yeah, so it's 100 kilometers on average, right? Because you've got places like here, and then you've got samples way up north because they're being pulled in here and here. Once again, because of people movements and so forth, right? People are moving up north for job and so forth. So this is where we're getting the 100 kilometers, but within the city, like I said, the numbers are nicer. Now, how close it is, remember, this is creating association between microbiome and places, not between microbiome and objects, which is another goal of us, which I haven't talked about, but it would be the same method. Hong Kong would be a pretty good place for us to establish our methods and create a free crime city with our method. But you know, this is only because they have, for two reasons. First of all, they have a really, really nice data set. And second of all, they're constantly sanitizing the subways, which resets the microbiome signature, which means that whenever we come, we're picking up the signature of the people who just came on the train. So that's really nice. And it is not what's happening in London, where we're not getting very good signal. And I was fortunate enough to find pre-COVID a traveler who compared Hong Kong and London pre-COVID, so it wasn't easy. And he said, Hong Kong is so clean, sanitizing only. London is filthy. Everybody touching everything all the time. Everybody moving, can barely sit here. So I cited this press article. And that's exactly what reflects in the data that we have here.
If they can London is dirty, they should come to New York.
Sorry. Oh, Aaron? Oh, hey. Oh, okay. Thank you so much. We're grateful. I kind of related the past comment. So I wonder, how long do you think your current prediction can accurately predict? Because we have climate change, and then sometimes the cities are developed, suburb becomes urban, things like this. So I think that geographically, you may think that sometimes at one point the microbiome composition could be changed. So current your model, how long do you think it can be used?
That's an excellent question, how sustainable the microbiome signatures are. Answer is, I don't know, so let's connect to the question of seasonality. Short answer is I don't know. Long answer is, I pointed out the issue of pathogens because these are, relevant to human, and they're also driving some of the signal, but they're not a lot. So once again, what is driving the signal? A lot of these are coming from the plants and the animals nearby the stations. So these are pretty much there. I mean, we're not disturbing them, we're not bugging them. So they're the ones who are driving the signature of this distinguish one station from another. So I would say it's pretty stable, but of course we'll need more data to do it. And last I presented, somebody jumped and said, hey, I have a project in Munich where we need your algorithm. We just got a lot of money to do exactly what Pavel said and what we want to do in Malmo, and now they want to do it in Munich, so they're going to use this tool. So yeah, as these tools come up and publish and improve in accuracy, we're going to see more and more of those cities joining in to swap their cities, and then we can answer all these really cool questions.
Great, fantastic talk. Let's thank Laurent and who are going to talk. Next, we'll have a talk from Cosmos ID. Mark Parker is the Director of Business Development for Asia Pacific and Emerging Markets in clinical microbiology. He has an excellent track record in problem solving and strategic business development and more. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing me 15 minutes to talk a little bit about Cosmos ID, clinical microbiologics. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you for the hospitality I've experienced at this conference. It's been really great, and I certainly look forward to the next one. This slide really is just to state that the corporation is really a science-driven, and the people involved are still publishing independently. The company essentially span out of 4 different spin-outs. So Clinical Microbiome is a Danish-based sequencing provider, Cosmos ID, equivalent organisation in North America, About 2 years ago, MS Omics joined the mix, and very recently DNA Sense joined it. And DNA Sense, I suppose, gives you a pretty clear indication of the type of company that's come together to form the CMC group. So they spun out of Aalborg University and have a range of tools that have been specifically developed to look at these type of areas, particularly focused on long-read metagenomics. So together, what we've been able to build is an organisation which is quite global in nature. We have laboratories in Denmark, we have laboratories in North America. Part of my role is to establish a network within the Asia Pacific region to give people in this room and in the region better access to our technologies across the globe, and obviously looking to expand into Latin America as well. And the organisation, particularly through Cosmos ID, has had a long association with people in the MetaSUB group, and we've got a number of projects running currently with MetaSUB people. The organisation really offers an end-to-end microbiome service, so we really want to get involved with planning with people at the very start of a project. It's often what happens is people will come and say, hey, go do this, and then when we sit down and start going through them, we realise there's elements of the design that can be improved. But what we really want to be able to do is give you a full service which allows you to free up your time to really focus on the discovery component of what you're doing, rather than having to do all sort of the grunt work on the way through. So just on that design element, it's really important to understand at the very start what your hypothesis is and what you're trying to test. Are we just looking to identify what's there, or are we really trying to develop an in-depth profile of what's there? Because that changes the question and it changes the approach. And all these components are highly interrelated. So what you do with collection can really influence what you're capable of doing with your DNA extraction. So people will go out and they'll use an off-the-shelf kit, but what you'll find is the media that's in there, the volume is too high for a low biomass sample. And when you do that, you've diluted it, and straight away, you're struggling to get the concentration you need for your DNA. So working with us and thinking about these things and the approaches that we can take to low biomass samples is really important moving forward. And of course, everybody in this room is constrained by budget. So thinking about your budget at the start, what your approach is, can really dictate what to do. So, is it better to have 5 replicates that can be pulled together, or is it better to try a different technology that will allow for a deeper sequencing and still achieve the same result? So what we'd like to do, before you establish your budget, come and talk to us about how to do it, and then we can say, okay, this approach costs you this, and this is the upsides and the downsides. This approach costs you this is the upsides and the downsides. So essentially you do a trade-off analysis at the start of your program, depending on what your budget is available to you. And not only have we got experience with the type of samples that you use, we've got experience with a vast range of other samples as well. And often there's learnings and crossovers that can come from one environment to another. So, a tissue which got a lot of host contamination, like tissue, is essentially, in many respects, like a low biomass sample for the targeted material that you're chasing. One of the things about us as a company is we're quite technology agnostic, because we've got the long read and the short read amplicon and metagenomics. Because we've got the PCR, we're not going to push you into a particular direction. We're going to say, okay, what's the best result for you, for your budget, for your program, and work with you on that. And of course, we've taken these technologies further into developing proteomics signatures, transcriptomics as well. And something I'll talk about very briefly is the Cosmos ID Hub, which allows you to essentially get your results in 48 hours from uploading your FastQ data and do a huge range of statistics very, very quickly. So again, freeing up your time to do more advanced work. Each of the technologies obviously has got its strengths and weaknesses, and bringing the new long-read technology of DNAsense into the mix has really given us some great opportunities to do some more interesting work. They have a pipeline to build very high quality mags, so they can actually profile a sample by creating mags specifically for that sample very, very quickly through an automated pipeline. And they can also do things like follow a plasmid through a microbiome, some work that they were doing with Phil Pope by looking at methylation signatures for that plasmid, which obviously are reflective of the host for that plasmid. In terms of profiling, we've got two different profiles. One's aimed at human and has been developed around a human data set. And we have the host agnostic tool, which is Kepler. And within the CHAN profile as well, the human one, we've got a fairly large phase library associated with that, because it's really the quality of the data set that you attach to the profiler is of critical importance. So with the human profile with CHAN, what we did is we went and sourced a whole range of human samples from around the world, from a range of different body sites, and then curated that data set from the 200,000 sort of mags down to 6,800 human species. When you're curating a database, you can often find two genomes which, in terms of AMI similarity, are very, very close together, but they can be entirely different species. There are some times where the closeness of the reference genome to another species can be very small, but when you go back and look through the lineage, you can clearly see they're different species. So when you're curating your database, it's really important to understand which reference genomes to choose to avoid that bias and error in the sample and reduce the false positive rate, and also improve the similarity that you're able to achieve within that sample whilst maintaining the high sensitivity. And that's what we did. We benchmarked CHAMP against other profiles to be able to show that we're able to maintain those high F1 scores. Part of it's the algorithms that you use, but part of it is also the reference databases that's used. And what we've demonstrated with CHAMP is that even where you have a low number of reads, we're able to maintain the accuracy. We could see that across a number of body sites. And so that also is true for a low biofitness sample where you have less reads available. You're still able to maintain that sensitivity. The Kepler profiler, it has 30,000 species in there. It's a multi-kingdom profiler, and again, we've benchmarked it against the tools that are available, and there's white papers that we can forward you on that. So how does this work in practice? So this is an example of a case study of a pregnant woman who had C. difficile. So one of the treatments for C. diff that they're using now is fecal matter transplant, and it presented a unique opportunity to see did you get strain transference from the mother to the child? And so what they did is they sampled prior to the FMT, and they sampled multiple times after that. And what you can see in the red dots are strains that have carried through from the mother in the bottom to the infant at the top, and that actually persisted. And we used the CHAMP strain profiler, and we also used a different strain tracking technique just to justify that we were actually correct in this instance. The other thing that this demonstrates is that you can track multiple strains at once. So you can see with the FMT, there was a broad range of strains that were introduced that had to be tracked through this particular study, and we were successful in doing that. And these techniques can actually be more accurate than PCR, because PCR, if you don't actually know all the variations that's there, you can actually miss or actually target a different strain that still fits your probe. The long-read profile has developed a similar type of tracking concept. In this sense, what it does is it says, okay, we've got an isolate for a contaminant, and then we build a very high quality genome for that. We identify SNPs and SVPs within it, and then we go and sample around the organisation and we say, okay, where did this contaminant come from? And by sampling the loading dock and the toilets and the kitchen and other incoming materials, we're actually able to show the exact source of that contaminant using this long read technology. And this is a commercial tool that we're using for food production. The same tracking technologies obviously can be used for genes as well. And so we use the CARD database to be able to track the passage of antimicrobial resistance genes across communities as well. The phage profiler also has been tested against Fanta, and you can see compared to that, we're able to maintain these high levels of accuracy with phage profiling as well. And that was utilised in a paper by one of our staff members, which looked at profiling centenarians and showing the diversity of phage within the centenarians environment, which had a similar sort of diversity that you would see within the bacterial microbiome as well in the centenarians. The other tool we have in here is also metabolomics. Metabolomics, we've built some very human-specific panels, and those panels can operate within a range of different matrices, so stool and urine and breast milk, targeting most of the types of projects that you'd like to see there, short-chain fatty acids, folic acids. But importantly as well, we also have a untargeted panel of over 6,000 metabolites. And again, we're very pleased to work with people on how they can handle their samples to derive the best results for those metabolites. So how does this sort of all come together? So in this particular multi-omics study, Danish group of citizens, 277 in together, we used the metabolome to look at what was the signal between people who had diabetes and those insulin resistance and those that didn't. And what we saw was that there was a branched chain amino acid signal. We then contrasted that with the microbiome, and we saw that Prevotella cochrae was one of the species that seemed to be related to that. And we were able to actually show that it was the effect of Prevotella cochrae on the branched chain amino acids that was implicated in it. And then we went further to prove that by inducing Prevotella cochrae into a mouse model and then showing the increase in insulin resistance. This is also really interesting because Prevotella cochrae is often known as to be associated with health, but what you can see is that there are a number of strains that are producing these type of metabolites that have a counter effect. But we were able to analyse that and see that within this particular sample. So just really quickly on the hub. So as I said, it's a statistical analysis tool that is a subscription-based tool. So you can use your own FASTQ data, you can use FASTQ data that we've sequenced, you can upload your own metadata into the tool. Within 24 to 48 hours, it's profiled. You choose the profile that you want, whether you want Geplo, whether you want Virome, whether you want Champ to be able to do that profile. You can choose your cohorts, you can change your cohorts, and it'll statistically process that for you. And this is an example of the workflow. When the data is uploaded, it goes through a number of quality checks, and we can help you out with understanding the statistical approaches that we've taken in the background of the tool, so you can use it in your methods papers, etc., as part of your papers. And of course, we pull all this together with some pretty sophisticated machine learning algorithms as well to be able to identify signals or look for biomarkers within data sets and other associations. So all this is possible within the organisation. So hopefully I've been able to very quickly show you that we've built a very robust integrated systems biology framework to allow you to perform quite high quality research in very quick time with the toolkit that we've provided. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any questions? Open up to the audience.
Don't stand this way. Take right.
Yeah. You can also catch Mark at the break with very impressive results, especially the champ pipeline. Thank you, Mark. Okay, we'll take a break now. Let's meet back at 11:15. Time for coffee and networking, and come back at 11:15. Please visit the sponsors. Very important.
Good, good. Good to see you. Yes, it is. It's just life.
Yeah.
Hi to people.
Yeah. Q&A was probably longer than the talk, but it's okay.
It's good. It's good. Yeah.
Sure that's
Fun time. Yeah.
They're sampling like
All right. Gonna have some coffee.
It's such a global, it's always inconvenient. And this is your shadow is emailing you.
Husband's juice.
We got the tour of the company. It's beautiful facilities. Yeah, it's really nice work. They're very excited to chat more about it. Yes, my epigenetics and the other. We do a lot of my lab at Cornell. Also, we do a lot of. Oh, yeah, that's right. I heard. Yes, yeah. All right. In the family. Yes. I love Cornell. It's been really great. Harvard's safety school. Don't go to Harvard. And I did my PhD. Yeah, so my PhD was at Yale, so also Harvard. So, yeah. I'm from Johns Hopkins. Yeah, so you're safe.
No.
Yeah.
Number one in health.
When I actually upload my slides, so we'll be back in like 2 or 3 minutes, and grab a coffee. I'll just find you either here or there, but give me 2 minutes. And I'll be there.
So you all came at the photo.
Potentially. I had a whole bunch of material that people see. It's nice for the people. You can do short. So we bathroom and coffee. We're gonna say hello to the yeah, I should change the title, but okay. It's all coming together. All of them.
Yeah, you were like, just started, and you were like, fire, on vacation. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So that's why you put that's like a different part.
Yeah.
Without problems.
Without problems, yeah. I was just waiting for you.
Yeah, anything like.
I mean, I was in the middle. It was really, it was of course, it was good because it was a pleasure. Yeah, lots of questions. It's for me, it's a sign that they like it because
Or maybe you are not saying clear enough, so we have understood everything.
Usually it's already it's not clear enough to like I don't know. Yeah, probably. Yeah, but Yeah. For the applications, but if I yeah.
Alina.
Yes, wait a minute. I will show you. Where is it?
You also bought the bucket hat.
I know. I did the I always yeah. I think I have to go something like that. Just remember your tax rate.
That is good because you want no buy something, I just buy some like all you do like next yeah, I used to wear the baseball cap and I used to stuff and then I scream
And I because
they're also like smaller than the rest
every step of the whole thing. They should be more or less similar because but I bought this
I got
no, I mean, maybe if I would longer today, I didn't. To me, there was the trains that come to this, I
Saying that it's still like America or something.
Yes, and if it's like Canada, it's like
This like. Flights are like they have to start and then go far away and then should be able to do that with space.
like they fly faster, that's why they can outspeed.
So the selection that I mean that there might be some flights tomorrow might be, but I wouldn't be like This is like so then it's 3 hours.
Because my friend, she's traveling tomorrow, she wanted to travel from Tokyo, but they closed Nagoya, Tokyo line, for Friday. But today, he checked, they added just to no, she traveled tomorrow, but not the direct line, trying yes,
Like because they might stop me in the airport. No, okay.
because everything was and he said that for yeah, and that's why they
I'll be back. Right back.
I think it's when I'm cautious about It's huge and it's like.
Oh, I mean, I think like, oh, that is like, it's like, in scale of time, it's not. When I can, I avoid like unfortunately for me, it's from it. I have if there is my for all the number of nobody in my life is correct.
Okay.
Because it's like, are you supposed to have everything my language and I might have this knowledge, but I get it in there, that's strong. But I don't have it in there. Yeah. And I'm like, going to this yes, I have to say that the job and I love it, it's not wrong. So I'm like, what is happening? They were, well, there was someone. Great. This is like the person. But something is, so I was in a show. So I think so and I was like, there's a possibility that when people because
it's because they expect some
they love
their language, they want the annoying and you are not It depends whether you're in Paris or other. No, I mean Paris better, the rest is worse.
And some like very basic, for example, when I went to just somewhere right
because you for or implemented anywhere as a package. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, then I send you
private transitional NIOs to see if that's actually an issue. And see if we don't have parking lots.
Yeah, I was thinking, if you saw we have different seasons, they have different parts for each season because it was separated. And if I'm not mistaken, for each season, each part we have positive controls using the map. So I can calculate for each part and we see if it somehow falls into the working range or not. And then for these repeated samples, I can also check the material composition and see whether I can see any material that are and whether they spiking range. And maybe this will be useful to export
There's another scenario. So are you familiar with like RNA later?
Yes.
So I know some people will preserve their microbiome samples in RNA later.
We did it.
Right. Yeah. And for some, RNA later will also create a bias towards hard-to-release microbes. So unlike shield, RNA layer can't go through extraction. But a lot of those are going to recovery.
But RNA later is still pretty lytic, especially with things like E. coli and other things. So they like, they're getting into the solution, you have to get rid of the solution, you have to get rid of the RNA later. So you wind up selecting in favor of micromolecules to lyse in the RNA later. And so you wind up depleting gram-negatives. That might be a solution to look at here, which is microbes like in the skin or exposure to
This is amazing how much background you need to know in being bad for tissue. Otherwise, you cannot really understand what is happening for the data. Yeah. No, I mean, I always try to educate these some basic like background procedures because I got so many clients. As you said, you became like a no guy because like your data is correct, don't give me this like garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah. Like, yeah, and I did that a lot. It was good. To be fair, sometimes it was also me saying no to biostatistician. Sometimes the biostatistician would say, we think your study's underpowered. We want to predict sample size. And I go back and say, what's your asset color here? It's going to cost us $200,000 and take several months. And I'm not even sure if the samples would exist. You're looking at a very you're looking at a very I really know the both directions.
And say right okay me, I thought he would come, which makes him he wanted to come. So I don't know why he didn't come. Maybe
I mean, I don't know, forget the names where I was just talking about things until, I have enough on my hands.
Okay, it's double trouble.
Yeah, and they're the exact same thing, so of course, you're figuring it out, you're figuring out how to do
Yeah, I cannot promise like right away because I'm staying for yeah, I took all my vacation. I decided to go because I don't know when I'm going to visit again.
everybody else who came to fly out tomorrow right now is currently very scared.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I'm not fine. I'm ready.
Yeah, I was supposed to go a week ago, so that might not happen. Apparently the way that I have to go to get there involves psychological bridges and buses, and because it gets really windy, it gets unsafe. But the bridges and things, and so I'm hearing these are
I know that trains are canceled.
they've already canceled trains.
They canceled Nagoya.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like not the whole country, but this specifically because they expect like really intense. That's why today they are adding more trains to the side.
Okay.
Actually, they blessed it yesterday and I watched the top like how I was present. I feel like I would be all over.
You have leg room now.
We could start the discussion now. Oh, no, I won't. No, I don't want to. I see that you're
That's well done. We don't, but.
You good? Need anything? I'm ready. All right, I'll introduce you. Somersault on stage. All right, everyone, please grab your seats. We're going to start next session. Okay, the next session we'll be hearing from Dr. Mason. Again, a man that I don't need for introduction in this audience. Just a kid from Wisconsin, you know.
You don't know.
We don't know him yet. Kid from Wisconsin, grew up to become a professor of genomics, physiology, and biophysics at Cornell Medicine, in addition to quite a number of other titles and responsibilities. So I'm sure we're all excited to hear from Dr. Mason. Please, so.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Lucaci. Thank you very much to everyone who's been speaking. Here. Okay. Yes, I want to thank first grab the pointer. So again, it's really great to give some closing remarks. I'm going to try and keep it to a bit of a review of what's been done, what's been coming, and then a little bit of a galactic and universal perspective on the heat death of the universe, which should be exciting, I think, at the end nonetheless. So first I want to start with thanks, which is, this meeting would not be possible without all of you wonderful collaborators and teams. So of course, support from our sponsors and industry partners, which include Twist, Rockefeller, Thermo Fisher, and Cosmos ID. And over the years, many other collaborators as well, like Hydrogen, Promega, Luna, and many others who have been committing resources and some things in kind, and sometimes also very much explicitly. So I also want to thank, of course, the team. I want to start with the thanks here, and this is the team we heard about a couple days ago, but you've seen them running around throughout the whole conference, so thanks especially Dr. Suzuki for being our local host, and other members of the Mason Lab and Cornell teams helping to make this conference possible. So a quick round of applause for all them. Not only are they heroes in terms of logistics, organization, and passion for science, but they also are very perceptive. So sometimes I got in here, it was abysmally hot outside, I think as everyone can attest, and so I got in one day to the hall and I was on a phone call, and I just laid down and I took off my shirt, but somehow they found me and they told me. And then this morning I had a call because we're doing an upgrading mission with SpaceX, there's some IRB updates, and I thought no one could see me, but apparently they could see me. And then also walking down the street, so apparently they're very perceptive, these people. So thank you for the most embarrassing possible photos of me. I appreciate it. Thank you. So I want to start with a bit of the background, a slide that I think we have all seen. And actually, when I was putting this talk together the last couple of days, I wanted to respond to some of the talks that I've heard, but also put into context a lot of what gets me excited and why we're here. And I went back actually to the Global City Sampling Day training slides that Krista and I have been using for many years. And I went back to it because it's something I always try to get the samplers and the students excited about before we go out every year. And a lot of it's about this chart, which most of you have seen, is that the cost to sequence the first human genome, of course, was hundreds of millions, really billions of dollars if you include all costs. And then it's precipitously dropped faster than Moore's law, which is increasing the density of transistors on chips every 18 to 24 months. And now we can sequence genomes, less than $1,000. It was announced that in 2014, that $1,000 genome was already supposed to be really big, and then in 2017, it was that we went to have the $100 genome, and then Illumina just said soon, and their stock price went up, and so it's a good, I think, business trick. It's just announcing it might happen soon, and you'll get a lot of additional stock benefit. But they didn't actually get there first technically. It was really other systems that got there technically. MGI, BGI, Ultima, Promethean, even Oxford Nanopore can now get there to do things and get good runs, and Illumina is close to it. But actually now there's multiple companies that are in the $100 to $200 range, making the cost of sequencing cheaper than ever before. So that means you can sequence anything, anytime, anywhere. And that means that every day that we wake up, there's more data today than there was the day before, and it's also cheaper than the data. So it means that every day is empirically the best day ever to be a geneticist. So it's not just my opinion that that's the case, it is an empirical fact of the fact that we get this much data, and it's cheaper, and it's bigger every day. So this, and I'll come back to this towards the end of the talk, how much data, how big this is going to get. But of course, a lot of the reason a lot of us are here is that there's more than one genome. There's not just the human genome, these large, bloated eukaryotic cells. There are, of course, all the bacterial, viral, fungal cells in, on, and around us. And they have many functions and features into how they mediate and modify our biology. So in particular, some really classical papers include noting that sometimes you can have intratumor bacteria. There's been other papers that indicate it might be in all cancers. I think we think now that's not at all the case, but certainly in some cancers, sometimes you can actually have drugs that, like gemcitabine, that are metabolized by gamma proteobacteria or modified. So you may have to first actually treat with antibiotics and then with cancer drugs. And so this idea of treating not just one species, but the entire holobiomarker, all the species, is really what you have to consider for cancer therapies or for complex systems. And even if you think of like, well, what if I'm taking a psychiatric drug? What if I'm just taking something like Prozac for my mental health? Even drugs that in theory are for humans can actually modify the gut bacteria. So from this paper, estimates that about a quarter of all the drugs that have human targets also modify the growth of strains in vitro. So maybe when you take a drug for your brain, you're taking a drug that's also affecting the gut, and also vice versa. And of course, these organisms are not just responsive to drugs, they can even make drugs themselves. And some really classical work from Michael Fischbach and Daniel is one of the MetaSUB members, is that you can find these biosynthetic gene clusters, which we've heard a lot about in this conference, and that essentially mining the data from sequence information you can find and predict and then validate, in the case of this paper, new molecules that confer self-medicating features to essentially regular normal human beings walking around with a relatively common bacteria. And so you don't have to ask them to do this for you. These organisms just work on your behalf. But what that means, most importantly, I think, for this framework is that originally, as I described a couple days ago, my training was as a human geneticist. But to be a good human geneticist, you can't just look at human DNA. Actually, if you only look at human DNA, you are a bad human geneticist because you're missing the full context of biology. You really have to be a cross-kingdom or cross-domain geneticist just to be a good geneticist, whether it's microbial or human, I think, in all contexts. And so this leads us to of course, we're doing here for MetaSUB and looking at interesting environments where we have complex interactions of eukaryotes, prokaryotes working together. We heard a little bit yesterday about some of the work of complex coral ecosystems, like the Two Frontiers project. There are other sister projects or brother projects, sibling projects that are around, which include things like the Extreme Microbiome Project or XMP. And this is another example where we want to find odd places, essentially around the world, or in some cases, working with VenCat, which you heard about, is even the space station, where we're going to see changes of temperature, salinity, pressure, gravity, different pH. How do organisms adapt and how do they survive? And how does life find a way? And how does it actually make it so it can survive? One of the quick vignettes of this is we did a paper, many people in this room, on Lake Hilliard, which is this candy pink lake in Australia. And you can see here, if you walk in the water, this is what Ken McGrath did, is the water is so hypertonic that it actually can lyse your cells and actually can hurt. So I don't recommend walking in unless you want to get kind of a skin treatment effectively, but it's very, very hypertonic water. And when you walk on the shore, it's so, the salinity is so high, you get these crusts of salt actually in your hands. So it's actually, the crunching as you walk, it's actually a crunch of large granules of sand. And Dillenia salina is one of the most abundant organisms we found, which kind of confers part of this pink color, and published just a couple years ago. You can read a bit about it here. But so that's one environment, but of course the genesis of a lot of the work we've heard about here, and what I'll talk a little bit about today, was looking at other environments where people have organisms that have adapted. This includes places like the New York City subway system, and this is one of my favorite pictures I took when I was first riding in the subway going to lab. And at the time I just thought this was funny because there's just this woman really terrified to touch the railing. This was not during a pandemic, so I thought it was funny then. It's less funny during a pandemic, because it actually could be dangerous. But the most important thing here is the aperture of the holes in this toilet paper or paper towel which you're using are much bigger than the microbe. So it's not even really protecting her from what you would want. So it doesn't really work there. But I have seen other people that have lab gloves. Actually, latex does a good job of protecting on the subway. And I think we've all had this experience where you touch a subway pole and it's either still warm or still wet or still sticky or just gross and you don't know why. You've always wondered what's there. And that, of course, was the genesis for some of the research that started the MetaSUB consortium, which was when my daughter here with an ice cream cone, whom I shamelessly use in my talks. She did grab a pole and she did briefly lick it. It was not a long licking session, but it was long enough to inspire this really deep question of what is there. And so, again, as a bit of background, most of you know this, but it's, we went across all the boroughs, and if you're going to do a project, you shouldn't just do 5 stations or 10 stations. I said, let's just do all 468 subway stations in triplicate, and then we can answer a question across all the boroughs. and it did timestamps and geotags originally with GIS Cloud. And of course, sequence these up to 10 billion reads, and you can use BLAST as well as Metaflan, back then the original Metaflan. And what is exciting to me back then and still today, which still motivates a lot of the work, and I'll talk about this at length at the end, is this simple number that I got so many emails about because people just couldn't believe it. Of course, we all know this, I think now, is that if you take fragments of DNA from any sample, but on average, half of them won't match anything in a known database. This is after you clean the data, you clean the quality scores. This is real nucleic acid that came from your sample, but does not match any known species. So we have bacteria, we have eukaryotes, viruses, we have other species, of course. But this ability to make maps of known species, of course, we could do, but then it's these unknown organisms that have really animated and still motivate a lot of curiosity for myself and for a lot of people in this room, is really just who is there and what are they making, this blue part of this pie graph. Like what are these creatures and what are they up to? Are they making small molecules? Are they making interesting peptides? Could we learn from them? And so this is one of the real, original snapshots of it, which of course, after we first published this, many people in this room and emailed and said, well, what does Seoul look like? Or what does Stockholm look like? What do the other cities look like? Well, we don't know. Let's start hanging out and have meetings and uniform a protocol and start to collect and find out. This, of course, led to us to build these 3 goals of metagenomic maps, which have forensic applications, which you heard about today and yesterday. They also can track AMR markers, and we publish some of this. I'll show you some other newer data we have on this. And I think the last point is the one that's the hardest, but will probably yield the most long-term applicability, potential impact. But I think these are all important questions. The hardest one may be, in some sense, to take the longest but have the biggest impact at the end. And so again, as most of you know, we can't, I think exciting about this project is, by definition, it cannot be done by one lab, it cannot be done by 10 labs, it can't be done by one company. It is a global project that necessitates global coordination and lets you ask global questions. So when we have Global City Sampling Day, as the Earth starts to rotate, as all these cities wake up, what's really, I think, fun is to see the map as we go past the international date line, and you see a lot of the eastern hemisphere start to light up as people collect samples, and it goes across the world as the world itself is rotating and flying through space. And so this is actually there are stickers outside. If you haven't seen them, it's like a swab that is pointing to the whole planet Earth, which I think we still have some stickers left there outside. And this is extraordinary because it is, again, it's by definition, you just cannot do by yourself or even as a country. It has to be a coordinated global effort to answer questions, and ideally do it with the same protocol on the same day or days. And so what, all of you contributed to, and we've really, I think, blessed that we've all been able to get some of this work out, is this has expanded the size of the tree of life. This is other people who've used data from MetaSUB, and also the seminal work from the group that collected both the first 2016 and 17 data sets. Did lead to about 11,000 new viruses working with Nikos and the JGI team, and also with a lot of new CRISPR risks. Right? You find that not only do we find new species and map a lot of biology, but we can see an enrichment of viruses that are specific to MetaSUB that also span many types of known CRISPR-based systems, but also some that are unknown. You can see here in purple or unclear. But a lot of these, these data sets give us a way to track what the microbes are evolving and resisting us effectively. Through this data, this is the Cell paper. And then also, we did predict, I pulled up this old slide, is the number of predicted new peptides coming from the data and being sort of characterized by others. Tokyo, which we are here today, was the most bang for the buck in terms of where do you find the most novel peptides around the world. So we should update this with all the latest data, but at least as of today, Tokyo, we should just all be sampling and sequencing right now inside, because Tokyo is so far the best place to find new peptides, as we've seen here. And so this led us to, in that paper, and some follow-up work to create with Andre Callas and Gunnar Rich and others, is this global K-mer index. You can type in now any sequence and go to the DNA location portal and see where has a piece of DNA occurred and with whom has it occurred, and map across the entire world where these DNA fragments are. So this is something that's come out of the work of the consortium that I think is also something that when I was a kid, I always thought would be cool to see what is all the DNA in front of us and could you see it. Of course, you can't quite see all of it, but this is about as close as you can get out of the current data sets. So what that gets us to is the point where we have basically a planetary scale genomics now. We can map at a planetary spread of organisms as they move, and as we've now done this over the course of about, we're getting close to 10 years of sampling, including some of the 2015 and 14 early samples. And what's exciting is these are examples of some of the sites and some of the screenshots of people as they're collecting. But per year, it's actually, the biggest year of collections across a number of cities was 2019-20. During the pandemic, was when we started doing a lot of shotgun RNA sequencing, and I'll come back to that next. But this has been a concerted and consistent effort that really has been enabled by mostly volunteer efforts of people who are curious about the world around them. So this is a quick update on the number of samples. And other applications that have emerged have been things like MetaSUB, we're looking at the sewage, for example, working a lot with Helena Sola Gabriel and George Grills at the University of Miami in particular. We wanted to apply shotgun RNA sequencing like we've been doing DNA sequencing. And there's really good reason to do shotgun sequencing. We just saw a good talk from Cosmos ID about some of the other applications, but all these, everything on the right, which is yes, is everything that you get when you do shotgun sequencing. So it gives you the capacity to monitor the broad range of all the organisms that are present. Now you might have to do enrichment, we heard about that from Twist, or you might have to do some selection, or adaptive sampling, you can do Oxford Nanopore, for example, so that, it's not perfect, like no technology is perfect, of course, everything has blind spots, everything has some imperfections, but the shotgun sequencing, I've always liked it because it just gives you the best example. When people sometimes people say, well, do you want to do 16X? And I'll often say, only if you do it for free, because I don't want to pay for it, because I don't want to be over here. But if you have something with a lot of post DNA, it is helpful, of course. But so we've been applying shotgun RNA sequencing for clinical samples. We've done this a lot with COVID patients, and notably for some of the sewage work, we did this also as actually now almost in press from Kearney et al. From Brady, is being able to find entirely new viruses and assemble them from the RNA sequence cell, like you can see an IT virus or a norovirus, and you can see where you phylogenetically place them, they're at the appropriate spot of phylogenetic tree. These are viruses pulled out from campus wastewater or hospital wastewater. You can see at the top, these are the different viruses they collected, and by color at the bottom is the abundance of them. Let me just highlight this here. You can actually see, where you see these viruses across different wastewater treatment plants or across dorms. In particular, over on the right, you can see actually, other species being picked up at different abundances, including things of relevance for clinical workflows like Heliobacter pylori, which could lead to some risk potentially long-term ulcers. And if you look at by bacteria, by neighborhood, this is something that also is fascinating in this paper that's now almost in press again, is if you look by, this is the campus basin over here versus the dormitories in the hospital, the wastewater treatment plant. What species are we picking up? You can sometimes see these bursts of species that only show up in the treatment plant, or in some cases only really show up in the hospital. Let's see Klebsiella pneumonia. We can see some other species that seem to really only be enriched in the hospital systems. And so this shows there's this variegation of the species that are there. And what's really fascinating is we also want to look at, we've heard a bit about antimicrobial resistance and getting that, but in work that we've done from these that I've shown that there too, you can actually look at the AMR gene density by site. And the hospitals have the highest density of these AMR genes relative to, say, the school wastewater or some of the dorms. You can see significantly different in the density of AMR genes. But then the last analysis that Brady did, I think was really great. I said, well, does this match what's being prescribed? If we look, for example, within the hospital versus the other sites that we're seeing a correlation, and it's a positive correlation, is significant. It's not dramatic, but it is trending the way you expect, and it actually has a relationship between who's actually getting these prescriptions and what we're seeing in the wastewater. So it's actually a bit of a validation of what we'd expect to see that within some by a few other papers, but this is the largest paper showed to date. So that's some of the applications here on Earth, but I think there's also a lot of excitement for extraterrestrial genomics, which we go just a little bit outside the planet. So it's not deep yet, but we have done some work with microbiomes for example, twin astronauts. This is with Mark and Scott Kelly, now Senator Kelly. For a little while last week, I got emails because it was maybe going to be vice presidential candidate Mark Kelly. He did not get selected as the vice president, so pick for Harris. I think it could have gone either way, but then we were worried about security for the data and people with extra locks on our freezers. We don't know, but so far we haven't had to do that. But we have been able to profile them through microbiome analysis. Also, more recently, Inspiration 4 crew, the Australian crew who went up into space with the SpaceX I-4 mission. You can see them here floating in space. They're happy because of microgravity, and you can see them here. They are, of course, getting excited again to do some preliminary work. But then they did get to work. They did do some essentially ultrasounds in space. They actually did sampling. They collected hundreds of samples. Actually, across the study, we just completed and published the largest astronaut microbiome study to date. So this is work from the lab across these 10 sites in pre, post, and during flight. And one of the things I think is interesting is we could see between the crew members some activation of immune response genes. You heard about some of this 2 days ago. We could see the evidence of some viral activation. But the thing one of my favorite figures is one that's in some sense simplest, but I think is very evocative, is that you can see the space capsule here, and then what do we see for essentially each area of the body that was sampled, and then how much movement of microbes do we see within the people, within the crew member versus between the crew members. And this is what happens to all of us every day. I joked on the first day about a crowded elevator that you might have microbial movement, but you can. You shake a hand, you get into any crowded environment. This is always happening, it's just that now we can really see it and quantify it. So I think this is, to me, something I imagine almost every time I shake someone's hand or get into an elevator or really just getting within about a foot of anybody, I'm wondering, what microbes did I get? Am I getting good ones, bad ones, what I get? But it is, but most of them, of course, are innocuous and just part of normal transmission of a continual cycle microbes. And so this work just recently published this summer is a large atlas and also medical atlas for different data sets for both human data as well as microbial data. But I'll highlight this briefly, but I don't think about the implications and spend the last sort of half of the talk or so about larger ways to think about the data and what we should be doing with them. And so I think to me, one of the biggest, building these atlases is great, building a global atlas of microbes is great, but I think the time dimension is the most powerful feature. And so I think one question I got in 2017 was, well, how long should we sample? How long as a consortium should we be out collecting samples? And I think we should do it as long as we can, because every year we collect, the data become more valuable, data become more interesting because you can see more. So the Framingham Heart Study, for example, we took 3 generations of dedication, quite literally, to get all this data, to do echocardiograms, to track the families over many generations. But these data gave us some of the first insights for cardiovascular disease risk that we otherwise probably wouldn't have seen, except for much longer. And so I think having multi-generational studies is very hard, but is not impossible. And it's something that you can have a lot of value in. So looking at AMR emergence or changes in the built environments or how we see microbes change, we can't address some of those questions unless we have a long-term and global effort, but we have the seed of that already started carrying and spreading. So this is one of my favorite examples as a study, and this is all the astronaut studies with other groups. And so there are other things kind of like this, which you have, of course, the UK Biobank, there's the All of Us program in the United States, the NHANES study, there's a Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, so other commercial versions like the FEMA.AI group of Israel. And this is, Human Genome Project, this is a partial list, but this idea is, I want to look at one sample and compare it to thousands or ideally millions of samples. Is something that hasn't really reached fruition in research, but I think can and should, and very well, I think it's getting there, but it's not quite there for a lot of data sets, certainly not for microbial data sets. And so I think what's exciting about this, for example, the All of Us program, anyone can join. So I was one of the participants, for example, so if I log in, I can see my dashboard where my DNA results and my survey data, and I can see fun facts about myself if I want to. And so like, does Chris Mason like cilantro? So here's a slightly higher chance of disliking cilantro, which is not at all true. I love cilantro. It's one of my favorite herbs that I've ever come across. And so it's not perfect, no database is perfect, but data access is what's key. So I do love cilantro, and I like that statement. But I'm sure, so the models will improve. So even though this is imperfect today, as you generate more data, the models will get better. So eventually, I'm hoping this will update and say, Chris, it looks like you probably do like cilantro. So then I'll be happy to log back in. So that's some sort of a bit extraterrestrial, but also there's work to look at interplanetary genomics that I want to highlight. Some recent work, which is looking at the Moon to Mars plans that NASA is currently working on with the Artemis missions. With the Artemis 1 just flew a couple years ago, just over a year ago, actually to go from Earth and get back to the Moon. In this case, it circled the Moon twice and then came back. And so we had some unique chance to look at the yeast that was flying in this mission. So went around the Moon and came back, and this yeast actually here, you can see it was the farthest that yeast had ever gone before. And we did confirm, for example, Hamid did actually can that this it still makes wine. So if you want to have wine from the Moon yeast, we can do so. And we maybe could have that at the next MetaSUB meeting. Is Moon yeast wine? It just tastes sweet actually. It's not that good yet, but in case we do have it in the lab. And also to that point of unique adaptational environments, we've been recently selected to also look at lunar regolith, which looks a bit like this, and try and get organisms that can grow in lunar soil and also that support plant growth as well as to survive in lunar soil, which is a big question that I think we all will have to address is, can organisms survive? How do they survive? Or how do they survive in the clean room, for example? We heard about it with JPL. And so this is some ongoing work that it's just starting, but we will be able to soon test in actual lunar regolith. And looking long term, we heard about this from Venkat, is that when the Perseverance rover landed in 2021 on Mars, we saw the videos a couple days ago of this robot collecting samples, and kind of eventually it will bring them back to Earth in the Mars sample return mission is the plan. 2032, it may be pushed back, it's not clear, but at some point they'll come back. And as you heard, we can use these environments to see if we can get organisms that can survive, or also see which organisms could survive on their way there. So work getting published with Venkat is to look at a framework of metagenomics to track any molecule that could survive the trip, or that could enable other things to survive when you get to, say, the moon or Mars. So it's a very long-term plan, but it's really been enabled by some of the work within the consortium. So the long-term plans I want to think about is, for what we've discussed a lot in the meeting, and I want to leave some time at the end to have a bit of discussion as a group about what are some other long-term plans, is moving from stations and hubs to a specific site at each station or hospital site every year. And some sites were done this, and I think we should really plan for decades of collection because the costs keep coming down. They will keep coming down. Probably get down to $10 a sample. Maybe it gets down to $1 per human genome, as what Ultima said, which is kind of a mind-boggling cheap plan. But but in terms of capacity on their circular flow cell, it's possible to get down to that stage. So I don't think we'll run out of things to sequence, but what if we do? What if we then get to go back to our freezers and go? And then the big question will be, if we've done this education and outreach correctly, then the metadata will be one of the most key features of those samples in the freezers. Is that we are currently updating a lot of this set for by September. We should have called MetaSUB be updated, but that is very much the metadata becomes as important, or maybe even more important than the data itself generated from the sample. And then long-term plans, we want to expand this network to the XMD sites or the Two Frontiers project you heard about, the database in Japan. And eventually, any built environment could have an evolutionary lesson that we could learn from. And so this, I'll come back to this at the very end, but this, I think, leads us to generate more and more data from many, many samples. And so when you say big data, some people get really annoyed with the term big data. I think it's being used too much. Some people say, if you say big data one more time, I will get very mad at you. So some people think it's overused, but I don't think it is overused. In fact, I think big data is big. In fact, there's a term that people use called it's astronomical. Data is gigantic, it's astronomical. But in an opinion piece from a few years ago, actually Stephens and Mike Schatt and others noted that the trajectory, if we really do double every 7 months of the historical growth rate for NGS sequencing capacity, it will soon eclipse the scale of astronomy data. So instead of someone at a bar, they come in and say, oh, it's astronomical, what you should say is, oh, it's genomical. There's just a genomical size problem. This is eventually what we think could happen. Because you start to get to the point where it's not petabytes, you can see here it's exabytes, it's zettabytes, you can see on that axis. And I've had some firsthand experience with this. When we first started doing some of our neurogenetics cohorts in my lab, we had about 100 terabytes for 1,000 genomes sitting on my desk. And this is the worst possible way to store data. But this was what we're made. And actually, people have been in the lab, and they'll find drawers still around the lab where these hard drives exist. And if you think about the scale, 100 terabytes is really only the beginning. Let's say for the UK Biobank, that's about 50 petabytes, assuming 100 gigabytes per band file. And if you do, say, whole genome sequencing for all new babies in Japan born, about 50,000 genomes, about 75 petabytes. If you did it for whole genome sequencing for everyone in the United States next year, that'd be about 10 exabytes. If you did it for every human in China, it's 130 exabytes. But then again, longitudinal, that's the power. So let's say we did 10 billion genomes with 10 time points and do cell-free DNA, then you get to 10 zettabytes, which is pretty big because of that scale. But remember, that's only the genome. That's just those genomes, those records. It doesn't look at the transcriptome or the epitranscriptome or the epigenome or gene regulation effects. So you model out the proteome, the metabolome, you can see how they interact with each other. You get annotations, you get kind of medical history, and also bacteria and fungi, omics levels, the viruses, the longitudinal data, what drugs are taking. And then again, you do this over time with many time points. Then you will eventually get to this point where you have the yottabyte of data, which actually would fill the states of Delaware and Rhode Island if with 1 million data centers. So you got to move people out of states just to have the storage of hard drives. And some people say, yottabyte, some people say yottabyte, I prefer to say yottabyte personally, because I think it's the best pronunciation of it. And so you think about all this data, then, and remember, say you want to just build a data center to do this now, so I want to build a yottabyte data, how big would that be? You know, if you want to just do it, remember your options according to Yoda, there's do or do not, there's no try, these are your two options. So if you did this, and you built it, it's about $60 for 1 terabyte these days, it's about 1 yottabyte, it's about a trillion terabytes, it's about $60 per terabyte, so it's about $60 trillion. It's basically, you know, you took it in the GDP ranking, it's more than all the money in the United States, and so you would just need to get all the money from about the rest of the world to just buy it. And of course, it's not scalable. My point here is to show we can't even physically do this if we wanted to. So then we need to think, well, what do we keep? We have to learn. We have to pick the features that are the most important for the biology. You can't just keep all the data. And we have to learn more than just cats, for example. With deep learning, we can learn what cats and dogs are. That's very easy. We have to learn more than that. So some of the tools are, like omics CNN, or ways you can have large-scale integrated multi-omics networks, or Sumo is another one that's come up from a student in our lab. And there's many methods for this, but here's an example. Some of them in benchmarking studies. And so this is just the point that we're collecting lots of data, collecting lots of samples, but this is often where I want to end in the last 15 minutes on more philosophical note, is that the big critique I think a lot of you probably heard is that, are we just collecting these features of data? Are they just features? And so the quote that someone may have yelled at you at some point in your life is something from Ernest Rutherford, said that all of science is either physics or stamp collecting, and that's it. And so when you heard this, you probably thought, oh, well, if I'm not doing physics, I guess I'm just collecting microbes, I'm just collecting features, I'm just collecting data. And does that make it sad? You might feel sad, but you shouldn't. I'll tell you why, because several reasons. One is, Rutherford had some other weird quotes. He did, got the Nobel Prize, of course, and it was for chemistry, not physics, but he said, things like the energy produced by the breaking down of the atoms, a very poor kind of thing. Anyone who expects this as a source of power is talking moonshine. Of course, now we have atomic power, and we have split the atom, so of course he was wrong here. So just because a Nobel laureate says something doesn't mean it's always right, as I think most of you know. And also, there's, he had other critiques about, any discovery should be explainable to the barmaid, which is a bad idea. But what physics did, I would argue, is for a long time, they did collect stamps for several hundred years of emission spectra, for example. Which atom, when it absorbs energy, what wavelength of light does it emit? So this idea of just first mapping out the universe around you was requisite for the atomic age to begin, was requisite for better understanding of matter at all. And I think so. I would argue that all physicists were stamp collectors until about the 1930s, when they could start to put that knowledge to work. And so I think all geneticists would probably have to still be stamp collectors for maybe a few decades, but I don't think it's a bad thing, because if we go back to what Rutherford said, he was very excited to find out the nucleus of the atom was built up, and from the great secret of all, he said, except for light. He thought that light was even a bigger secret to unravel than nuclear physics itself. And I think the reasons for that is because it is very complex, because there's always an exception. There are many variations in life survives almost anywhere we've ever seen matter exist, and so it is complicated. And so that, I think, is a bit of a why we should keep doing this. But I want to close with two other why stories. Like, why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we stamp collecting sometimes? What are we doing with our stamps? What's the value of the data? And so I think one of the whys is for applications to disease, of course. So one of them in particular is, why bother working hard late at night, publishing papers, sequencing, doing the analysis, all the work on organization. One of them is, on a personal note, my cousin was recently diagnosed with ALS, and so I'm going to foolishly run the marathon this fall, and hopefully I will not die during the marathon, but raising money for ALS, and that's one thing I can do. But other things that you can do is go find interesting microbes, like the medical expedition to Easter Island in 1964 was just to find weird microbes in the soil, which led to the discovery of rapamycin, and a whole field of research around it. It was literally just digging in the dirt that led to new drugs and new therapies. And so I think what I was looking at yesterday was, well, how many drugs have been found that have come from microbes, just like literally digging in the dirt? And so the estimates from recent literature is that in the past 8 years, about 22,000 biologically active compounds have been obtained from microbes. A lot of them are from gram-positive, and they might see some are from fungi or some from unicellular bacteria. So there's tens of thousands of molecules that have been found in the dirt that are being pulled out, right? So we haven't even started doing a lot of the culturing that James was talking about, really getting good maps of these microbes. And we're really just getting started on this and barely doing it in a really systematic and throw it away. So I think this is the big question of why. Is that literally every time you grab a sample and carefully annotate it, do metadata, sequence it, analyze it, this could lead to a discovery that at some point might be treatment. And of course, it could come from anywhere. It could come again from somewhere at the bottom of the ocean. It could come from a carbon vent. It could come from a subway pole. And I also like to reflect back what Nico said in his talk, is that data is non-rival, is that other people can use the data. Just because you, like if I have an orange and you have an orange, we exchange fruits, and then each still have an orange, but if I have an idea and you have an idea, we exchange ideas, then we each have 2 ideas. And so this idea of data being non-rival, I also like that concept. And it's actually something that links to some work in intellectual property debates. Is are you familiar with the Amen break, which is a drum beat that's used in a lot of rap songs? So the Amen break was one of the first classical beats that was sampled, and there's a whole history of this here on YouTube if you want to listen to it. What's interesting is when samplers first came out, this ability to sample a little bit of a song and then make a rap song or make a new electronic song, there was a time that was described that visual tools allow potentially unlimited amount of new expression, where cultural production, at least musically, was full of possibilities. And as what Lawrence Lessig says, that by virtue of being able to freely appropriate from the musical past, you could make new combinations and thus new meanings. And so a society that's free to borrow and build upon the past is culturally richer than a controlled one. I think I love this analogy because this is for music, but the same thing is true for genetics. So a scientific community that is able to freely borrow and build upon the past, on every piece of public data, is scientifically richer than one that cannot. So I think the degree to which whenever possible, having data be open source, be accessible, be findable, using fair methods is essential. And we've seen cases where this was not true. So for example, in human genetics, in the mid-2000s, about 20% of human genes were patented. So if you wanted to get a follow-up test for your BRCA1 mutation or mutation, you could not do that. You could only go to one company. So it was impossible, very difficult to get even just a second opinion on the mutations you might carry. And even if you isolate your own DNA in your home, you would be infringing patents. And so I think this is one of the battles I fought personally, is I want to see we should, I filed a brief, we worked with the ACLU, and then put out an op-ed that said, the Supreme Court should invalidate the patent on human DNA. So this went all the way from the district courts to the appellate courts. We won and then we lost. And we argued in 2013, and I'm very glad to say that in June of 2013, these claims that owned DNA were rejected by the Supreme Court. And what happened in one day is the ability to do just bracket testing went from $4,400 to a few $100s. And that was back in 2013, but so now it's even cheaper. You can probably do it for $50, $20. There's also a nice history of this legal battle here. If you're going to do legal defense battle books, this is a good summary of the book here. But I think freeing the data was important, not just because it gives you better diagnostic care and better abilities, but this book, again, has a really good description of it. But the genomic data should be free for the purposes I described before, is that if the sampler lets you make sounds, and a sequencer that we all run around and we get bits of DNA, we get this raw material. If you like being a DJ, you can actually then make a musical composition with your turntable, but the synthesizer and sort of the construct for making and learning will eventually make it so we can make a genetic composition from all the data that we've gathered. So this has implications for the why, number one, which would be for medical purposes, where you can actually, potentially find a new drug, find a new therapy, but also it has applications to faraway places. So this could be, could you make plants and animals that could survive on Mars? Could you make it so that Mars could be self-reliant? Could you make it so eventually you have tens of people, then hundreds of people, or thousands of people that can reclaim liquid waste, or have material recycling, or biopolymer synthesis, all from microbial traits that we picked up and learned and annotated. And I think what's great about this group is, as we've been chatting later, there's entrepreneurs for profit and nonprofit. In this group, we've got, it's a partial list, but everyone that's on the nonprofit or for-profit side. I want to highlight actually Genesis Healthcare, just also here in the front, who just came to visit as well today. It's one of the largest, the largest genetic sequencing company in Japan. So the ability, we recently started coming to do newborn whole genome sequencing, but there's metagenomic diagnostics, there's microbiome profiling, there's even some of the ways you could and display the media groups. And then, of course, you heard a lot about two Frenchies yesterday. But I think all these groups working together, whenever possible, something is open and free and accessible. But sometimes, commercial entities can move things faster or move them in a different way and move them forward. So I think this is really a partial list of what's been built within members of this community. And I'm sure there's others, but please tell me to add them. And so, but I think it requires this kind of large village, both for-profit, nonprofit, collaboration between and across industry, academia, and governments, and all working together. And so that's That's the why number one. And I want to close with the why number two is the why we should do this and continue this work and why we should care. Is, it's good to have medicine to cure patients, to resolve disease, but then if we're just living long enough, eventually the sun will engulf the earth, which I think about almost every day. So we can't just cure disease forever. At some point, we would have to look potentially to go elsewhere. And so if you look at planets that are somewhere nearby, relatively close, there's places that you could get to and maybe survive today. And there's actually some of them, as you measure by the Earth Similarity Index, there is actually, one is Earth, of course, but then one is based on the density or the surface radiation, or sort of the solar flux of what's in all these planets. You can see that Mars has a Earth Similarity Index that's actually not that good. It's over here, really less than 0.8 here in white, so it's not even that good of a place to go. It's just that it's close. But there's all these other planets relatively close that are similar to Earth that you could go to potentially survive today. And there is, if you look across our galaxy, where's every single exoplanet that's been discovered, a lot of them are on these higher rankings, purple and pink spots that are planets you can go to, maybe survive today. And so I think this is important to think about for long-term questions, but also our current lifestyle might be is destroying our microbiome. So we're losing species before we even find them. And this is, of course, not the first time. So this is, if you look back at the past 500 million years, this is what the Earth has looked at. The temperature's gone up and down. We've had a world without polar ice caps in orange. We've had a world with polar ice caps in blue. And it's gone up and down. Every time it changes too quickly, that's when we have mass extinctions, these 5 highlighted spots. So this is part of the challenge, is that we are trying to avoid this now. Of course, we have the temperature increase too fast that would lead to potentially a mass extinction. But I actually take a longer view on this, as I was kind of alluding to. So if you zoom out past where these extinctions have been, 2 times 700 million years ago, we had an ice ball, kind of snowball Earth, and zoom out a little bit more, you can see we kind of live in this very nice but sort of temporary temperature canyon here, where the Earth used to be much hotter. Someday it will get even more hotter, and eventually it's all still here on this planet could be at risk. And I think about this a lot because the creatures that we're all curious about, life itself. We think about these 3 kinds of creatures: consumers, decomposers, and producers. But argue to you that we are the 4th kind of life, all of us here. I've given a lot of you about this before, but that we are the kind of organism that can serve as a guardian and shepherd to protect a lot of these creatures and actually leverage their knowledge to even help us get to and survive in other places. Quite literally, the guardians of the galaxy is what we are. So because only humans are aware of extinction, only we can understand this. And so we have a duty to all life, both past, present, and future. And just got an email a couple of days ago about some ongoing work that's at Colossal, for example, which is trying to bring back the woolly mammoth and other species. And there's ongoing discussions to do it, should we do this for microbes? We bring back microbes as well. If we bring back the eukaryote, bring back the net represent plants and microbes that used to be in that ecosystem. And so the answer is probably yes, but we have no idea how to do this. It's never been done before, but we're going to slowly try it. But it's a fascinating and extraordinary time in science that we could leverage all the interesting microbes that everyone's talking about, all the interesting species, and they can all become part of a genetic catalog of ways we could help protect species, reinvent species, even resurrect species, if you will. And so I think this is an extraordinary time that we're just getting into, and we'll get continually more interesting as we move ahead. So in closing, I want to thank everyone in my lab, especially those that are here, as well as everyone back in New York who's made this work possible. I want to thank, again, the organizers, and also want to make a quick note here. So thanks for this family here in Spirit of Adventure, all of you here. And then even though there's a typhoon coming, none of you have left yet. So we might, although some flights just got canceled, so we'll see. So the Spirit of Adventure and camaraderie and friendship. And then I want to close and open it up for Q&A, but also note that we have a number of candidates for where the future meetings might be. These are the current listed candidates. We'll have some votes and some discussions. There's potential it could be on the moon if it's 2028, so that's far away. And this will be an ongoing discussion of where we should have the next meetings, but we like to have local hosts and like to keep building the global community and have interesting talks and great science. And again, I want to thank everyone. Thank you for your time, and happy to have a little Q&A and discussion. Thank you very much. First is maybe any comments on where we should well, and Nikos has sent a comment as well. So there's lots of places where other meetings have been, but also on any questions about microbes, the projects, the logistics. We're in the middle of making some longer term plans for the group, but happy to
take it. Chris, the speaker that we had yesterday that made the recording, the video recording, I had a question on that I asked you that, and you gave me an answer, and I want to ask again to see if your answer has changed since then. We're collecting all these, we're surveying the microbiome to avoid the next COVID. All right, that's a really nice thought, it's very admirable, but several questions. Number one, would we be able to identify the next COVID? Number two, what would we doing with this information? How do we identify something that looks like it's going to come, and which, coming back to the whole reasoning, to the rationale of these endless surveys that are very time and cost and everything, where do you think this should go?
So this is an active debate for sure within the CDC in the United States, within the viral community. You know, is it foolish to go looking for microbes that could kill you? And I think it is still worthwhile to do, because I mean, the genesis of the data is not the problem. It's to what you do with it and who has access to it. I think so. Knowledge by itself is not dangerous, but the applications are. For example, a lot of the AI algorithms have been trained to say the algorithm is racist because it's not as good at black people as white people. So no, the algorithm is fine. The data set is racist, is biased, essentially. So I think the data itself is one thing, and then how it's used and what happens to it is another. So there's discussion that maybe we keep doing these surveys, but you don't release all the data right away, or you have to track who has access if someone's trying to synthesize a virus or modify it. So and that's what's being discussed. Nothing's been finalized yet, but I would still rather lean towards more information versus less about the totality of life on Earth and in other places. So I think I still think it's worthwhile to do. But the question is, what do you do once you have that data? In a perfect world, it would be great to just release the data publicly and the world would be safe. Maybe, like my dad lost his phone yesterday in Tokyo, but then someone turned it into the police station, because I've heard culturally, and you can put your wallet down on a table because there's a spot in a restaurant in Tokyo. And maybe that's how the world should be, where it's responsible and safe, and no one will wipe your phone and then take it and sell it. But not everyone is as I think as responsible with data. So that's the challenge. But I still think I'd rather have the information than deal with the dissemination question versus just not knowing at all. For sure.
Thank you. And advise him to put AirTag.
Yes.
That's what I do.
Yeah, and then charge the phone as battery died, so we could. So everyone charge your phones.
So, a question here. So how, in terms of space research, I'm always talking about it very proudly, but I always get the same question or the same comments by the non-scientific, sometimes scientific community, but mostly non-scientific, and it is, why do research and that is spending so much money on like space things and space research and not really trying to save this Earth, this planet? Like why, how do we talk to people about this, the importance of this, and that it's worth doing even both? Like, so what are your thoughts on that?
I have some slides on that I could say, because there's at least 3 reasons of why we should do it. I think the first is that it is, it's one visual, I suppose. There's you don't have to do one or the other. I'd say, or we know that actually, I'll do my slideshow I just described. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can address social problems and other diseases and cancer and infections while we support space. Some of the bigger questions, Colossal gets this as well, is why are we spending all this money on a company, $300 million? Could we spend all that on conservation efforts directly, like with some of the white elephants or some of the white rhinos or other species, that we should just put the money there versus having a company that's building technologies for conservation. And I think there's not, only one pot of money. So a lot of that money that's in VC spaces would not necessarily go to conservation anyway. And it's also, the technology there about many species versus if you just save one species. I think that's a bit of the shuffling the chairs on the ship of the Titanic that doesn't go down. You need technologies that could be more scalable to save more species. And so I think you could do both. But really, we've got to the moon in 1969 in the United States, but also passed civil rights legislation, rolled out vaccines sometimes for the first time. So I think to pretend you can only do one or the other is false, and is also false dichotomy. So I think, but that second reason I'd say is it also is very hopeful. If you think that tomorrow is better than today, and you look up at the stars and you think we might be going there, I think that it's hopeful for the next generation. But if all you can do is look at the stars and think I'm never going to get there, and the future is worse than the present, that will have a negative impact on society. And then the third reason we do have to scrap is that this effort to go into space and find life and preserve life is something we literally have to do eventually, or all life as we know it will, if it's still here, will be gone. So if you value life, you have to at some point do that. If you don't value life and you're a nihilist, I probably can't help you that much anyway, I'd say. But there are some nihilists out there arguing with unsuccessful. It's a long answer to the why, but it's something I think about. I mean, how many of you want to go to space? Anybody answer that? Okay. Some of you already know where you want to go. And then, anyone else in, I'm curious if anyone's in the Aldous program or the UK Biobank or anyone else, I might be one of the only ones, but you can share your data as well. And hopefully, well, I think that's it for the Q&A, and then we want to leave it open for other people who obviously put some ideas for the future meetings could be, but we wanted to also have a little bit of time to discuss any other questions people have just broadly about the consortium, the efforts, the goals, anything else that people want to discuss and jump into. Or wishes, if you wish something was one way versus another. If you wish we could all do the sampling on the space station, I can't do that yet for you, but any other concepts or ideas? People want to go with Braden and Krista to the next scuba. The two frontiers team are here to go scuba diving. I can't offer that either. You should help with that division. But if some people want to go underwater, get scuba certified. You have to get certified again.
Do you think
there seems to be a lot, and maybe it's just specifically this group, but so much effort in space versus the depths of the ocean. Is that just not your expertise, or do you see more potential in one versus the other? Question about what kind of research is going on there.
Good question. So that, and hence the two biggest frontiers exist. Space and ocean is the biggest mysteries. I mean, I just came from scuba diving last week, and I every time I see a creature underwater, I always think, oh, what's the genome look like? That kind of thing. But of course, I'm a geneticist, so I think that. But I think we can and should be both, and to some degree we are. But yeah, there are hundreds of billions of dollars being spent on spacecraft and missions and getting up into space. Some of the fuel is expensive, the engineering costs. Sometimes it's a bit of bloat. I think Lockheed Martin, sometimes they're the only contracts for NASA, so there's not incentive to bring a lot of their costs down. There's a bit more competition today with other multiple agencies self-competing for NASA funding, for example. And its competition is good, but it was, so some of those budgets are bigger just because they get those. It takes a lot more fuel and engineering. But the submarine, if you have something at the bottom of the ocean, some of those budgets are also tens of millions of dollars just to get a craft down to sample at the bottom of the ocean. This can be complicated and expensive. So I would, in a perfect world, we'd be funding both of them excessively and constantly, but I know there is still limited resources at any given moment for any organization, so you have to pick. And what I'd be curious to see is if there's, things like what, some of the cyanobacteria for two frontiers, like what if, the dream would be, we found something that solves a carbon problem here on Earth and helps you have carbon in a space station. So I think, even though they're just different, I would like to see more exchange between those disciplines. And I think, and more philanthropy might be helpful, because I think government funding is going up a little bit, like the NIH is going up a little bit every year, sometimes it's flat. NSF funding is down a little bit this year, sometimes it's up. The funding oscillates, but there's philanthropic organizations that sometimes drive science a bit faster. And so that's another avenue I think we should see more from. But if anyone here has an extra $1 billion, please let us all know. I think everyone in this room would love to do experiments with it. But both, I guess I'd say. Whenever we're getting two options, you always have two more, both or neither. So I'd say both.
I have a comment.
Yes.
like to debate the name MetaSUB as a concept. As we started with subways and urban biome, we quickly expanded to samples that encompass the world and different environments. And it's been a point of discussion for new collaborators and people that we do approach in the community. So as a consortium, MetaSUB is something that we've stood behind for many years, but is it something that is now more than that?
It definitely is. So I'd love to hear thoughts from everyone. I'll jump in, but it already is more than metagenomics. It's metatranscriptomics, it's metacats, it's metasewage. We have the largest cat microbiome database of anyone in the world right now, for example, from shotgun RNA sequencing. The cats weren't part of it, although in Istanbul, there's a lot of cats everywhere on the streets, for example, so maybe they overfly. But it has become more an urban built environment, urban microbiology project, which is I guess, but it has expanded far beyond in some ways. And so I think it could be rebranded, it could be renamed, it could be just expanded. I mean, on the website, it's just been expanded. It's just another parallel projects. But I welcome everyone's thought. I mean, I think this
redefine the acronym. You can make a lot of things spell out MetaSUB.
That's true. It could be synthesis of urban biomes or a systematic understanding of biology, or it could be anything exactly. So good point. And meta just applies like it's on many scales, all species, so that could stay. And the meta design was more, originally some of the concepts were, what if you have like a probiotic in a hospital wall that would reduce hospital-acquired infections? Some of the design questions in the early days were tinkered with, but we haven't any large, I'd say, let's design a hospital differently, or let's design a room differently. Some studies by Elizabeth Henoff, who's at NYU, she's done some work on plants in hospitals that shows decreased volatile organic compounds, which has been interesting, but there's only a handful of studies that have done the design part. So I think we could do it by a Google Doc or something, everyone put in their name, what it could be, but it might be easier just to restructure the acronym rather than call it MetaSUB or OmniOhm. That's actually a company, I can't take that one, but there's I'd be open to, but it could be both as well, it doesn't have to change. We could have this renaming and still have parallel sibling projects like the two frontiers of XMP, people doing things that are related and sharing data, best practices, methods, tools, and then everything else is reinforcing ecosystem of partners and collaborators. So I think, I don't have any specific term, but it definitely is more than what's written there already, for sure. Any other? We're covering those things on the planet and off the planet. Does anyone else have, and the oceans, does anyone else have anything else we should be investigating?
I guess more of a philosophical thought, like, do you think we can more engineer ourselves to live in high pressure or very low pressure, like the deep seas and black holes, or nothing, like that's something that's stretching us out, spaghettification or whatever. Or if we could find microbes like that can withstand that and use that as an adaptation like we did with tardigrades.
Like the tardigrade, I mean, you could do, it's a great question. I think humans are frail, so we do require a lot of engineering code, but if you did, using, for example, there's a great paper that described a battery that could be attached to a black hole as a battery. So you could actually, as a preprint about this, we attach battery to the Hawking radiation that comes off a black hole, and it'd be a way to survive towards the end of the universe longer. So there's some articles about this. Could you have a microbe that survives on Hawking radiation off a black hole? Probably not yet, but I don't know, if you have hundreds of trillions of years to work on it, possibly, I'd say down the road. Yeah, so I think maybe we've got some time to figure that out, I guess, yeah. Any other thoughts? End of the universe musings, wishes. Thanks to everyone who's online. And final thanks again to Krista especially, but all the organizers and all the speakers. Thank you very much, all of you. One more time. We will adjourn for today, but we'll see your moderator.
Yes, let's thank Dr. Mason. We'll move on. We have closing remarks, but also a presentation of gifts for that.
Yes, again, Dr. Suzuki giving some closing remarks. And then also, and if you have ideas or updates for us, especially the next meeting location. And I think that was perfect.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. now have closing remarks from Dr. Suzuki.
Okay. Konnichiwa. Okay, let me give you short closing remarks. Thank you all for attending this MetaSUB conference in Tokyo, Japan. I greatly appreciate all the organizers and the sponsors, and of course all the speakers who made this event possible. Yeah. So you have brought microbes from your home to Tokyo.
You're welcome.
Right? Maybe novel peptide. And they exchange microbes here, and probably will take microbes back home with you. So we have, I mean, we are lucky and fortunate to study this process. So yeah, let's continue improving, advancing our microbiome research to benefit the society. Yeah, and metadata. Metadata is a lab note to the future. Yeah, metadata. Yeah. If you notice anything during your stay in Tokyo, Japan, yeah, please share it with us. So it could be valuable, great metadata for interpreting urban microbiome data. So yeah, please let us know. For anything, food, temperature, people, culture, yeah, anything. Okay, so yeah, I hope to see you at the next MetaSUB conference, and I hope you enjoy rest of the time in Japan and have a safe trip home. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Suzuki and Dr. Mason. Nico's already left, so he got his keynote gift, but we also have some gifts for Dr. Mason and Dr. Suzuki for their dedicated support of MetaSUB and the conference. Thank you guys both for all your work.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, everyone. And as Dr. Suzuki said, safe travels and enjoy the rest of your stay. Woo! And please take your trash on the way out. See you next year.
What?